And we're live. Friends from around the world, welcome to the Great Debate. Not a debate where both sides work to defeat one another, rather a debate where both sides come together to find common ground. That's what makes this debate great. I've been waiting for this one for a long time now, and I'm very happy this day has finally arrived. There is a few competing definitions of anti-Semitism, the main one being IHRA. This has been a definition of anti-Semitism, which I would say most Jews were in consensus about, that this is how we should define anti-Semitism, but it was not without controversy. A few months ago, a new definition called the JDA definition was published. It's fair to say that the publishing of this created quite a bit of controversy as well. That's exactly why we're going to have this conversation. These difficult and important conversations is exactly what we're here to do. Our guests today, Ken Stern and Derek Pensler, both were involved in one way or another in IHRA and JDA definitions of anti-Semitism. We're going to have probably around an hour chat, and then we'll take some audience questions. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible. Of course, we're going to prioritize super chats. Before we get started, a big shout out to our Patreon visionary members. We have Trivium Energy Pty Ltd, SOG Cannabis, Max Marine, Geffen Posner, Adam Albelia, Maya, Adam Becker, and our one and only champion member, Raja. If you want to support the show and become a patron, you can find information in the description. If you're new to Sulha, like and subscribe. We're doing these live streams every week. Our main focus is to reconcile between Israelis and Palestinians. But as you see, we also do important conversations on anti-Semitism. It's good to have you all here. So we're going to get started. Brief introductions with from Ken and Derek. Please introduce yourselves and also explain your involvement in the respective definitions you were a part of. Ken, we could start with you.
Sure. Hi, my name is Ken Stern. I'm currently the director of the Bard Center for the Study of Hate. And for 25 years, I was the American Jewish Committee's expert on anti-Semitism. And I was a lead drafter of what was then called the EUMC definition of anti-Semitism, which came out in 2005. I could explain in a little more detail, if you like, why it was created and what its intentions were. But it was basically after the Second Intifada, and there was a need for having at least a coordinated effort in various European countries that were doing data collection and other types of work around anti-Semitism to know what to look for and know what to exclude. And that's how it came about. I was the lead drafter. There were other people doing the politicking. But it was in 2005. Then what happened was that it was contentious, as you said. There were various different iterations of it. And then the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance took the text of the EUMC definition and adopted it as their own. And that's been what's been promoted. So I was the drafter of the definition and its examples that's now known as the IHRA definition.
I think you're muted.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. I said thank you, Ken. Derek, all you.
Well, thanks for inviting me. So I'm a professor of history at Harvard. I teach a combination of Jewish history, European, and world history. And my approach to the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism is very different from Ken's, in that I was not one of its drafters. I learned about the declaration several months before it was issued. I was contacted by one of its chief drafters, which was a committee of there was a central committee of about 6-7 people and a larger committee of about a dozen, I think, that actually coordinated drafting the document. And I was contacted several months before it was issued to ask if I would support it. They were going to have a small group of people support it. They wanted my name on it. And I read it and I instantly liked it. I thought that the Jerusalem Declaration of Anti-Semitism dealt with a very serious problem. I thought it dealt with it in a remarkably clear and distinct way. And just want to point out that although most of the controversy about the Jerusalem Declaration focuses on its final section, which is about kinds of tough conversations we can and should have about Israel and Palestine that are not to be considered automatically anti-Semitic, I actually also like those portions of this document that deal with anti-Semitism as a real problem and a real harm, and talk about the situations in which we can assume that certain conversation about Israel and about Jews broadly understood is anti-Semitic. So I thought that this document did a great job in both respects. I found it to be clearer, simply more concrete than the IHRA definition. And that goes above and beyond questions of how the IHRA has been used or exploited over the last few years that Ken can talk about as well. So I just want to point out that my reaction then was one of not a participant, but someone who really liked the JDA when it came before me. And although I can't speak on behalf of all 300 plus people who signed it, I do know a fair number of the people who signed it. So as our conversation goes on today, I think I can talk about certain common concerns that people have had about the IHRA, and that led people to find the Jerusalem Declaration to be something that is both clearer, in some ways more concrete, but also better at fostering open conversation about the most controversial issue today, which is Israel-Palestine.
Thanks, Derek. Ken, when you, I don't know if you learned about JDA when it came out or you heard about it before it came out, but were you open to a new competing definition, or did you think it would just muddy the waters to what anti-Semitism actually is?
Let me go, I'll answer that, but let me go into a little bit of the detail of the creation of what was then called the working definition, EUMC, now IHRA definition, and then you'll be able to understand my answer a little bit more. So when the Second Intifada started, and you started seeing an uptick of hate crimes against Jews, particularly in Western Europe, but not only there, the group, the EUMC, had a responsibility of looking at issues of racism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and they put out a report in 2004 that was basically correct in terms of what its findings were. It wasn't just traditional white supremacists that were responsible. There were some young Arab and Muslim folk from around Paris and other places that were also participating in the anti-Semitic hate crimes. And what the EUMC said was two things. One is we have a problem because our data collectors in these different points don't know what to put in and what not. So it was more of guiding of that. And then also they said, well, temporarily we're going to use a definition that looks at stereotypes about Jews. And that struck me as problematic, not only because those stereotypes are a reflection of what anti-Semitism is, but it was addressing the political problem that Derek was alluding to in a way as well, which is what happens if a Jew is beat up on the streets of London or Paris or so forth. It's a stand-in for an Israeli. And what the EUMC said was basically if that person that did the attack had these views about Jews, then transfer them to Israelis and retransfer them back to the person in front of them, but in reaction to something Israel did. That's anti-Semitism, but if they were just upset at Israeli policy and beat up the Jew in front of them, that's lamentable but not anti-Semitism. I mean, we just saw recently in various cities why that tact was a problem. And in fact, at AJC, we had the head of the EUMC come and speak about this. And a couple of weeks beforehand, there was a bombing of a Montreal Jewish day school in retaliation for an Israeli assassination of a Hamas leader, so not anti-Semitism. So one of the main things, reasons for the definition, in addition to giving data collectors, was to take away this whole idea from hate crimes of did the person really hate Jews or not. We had the situation where there was a Jew who was kidnapped because Jews were rich and held for ransom and so forth. There was debates in the press. It said a positive stereotype, a negative stereotype. So what we wanted to do was to take some of the jurisprudence from the US hate crime law and said, if somebody is picked on because they are Jewish or seen aligned with Jews, and that's the intent rather than the motivation, that should be counted. And that was of particular importance. And we can talk a little bit more about how that's been institutionalized or not with the EUMC and IHRA and so forth. I think mostly not. But to me, that's one of the problems. As much as I respect the people with the JDA definition and the reasons why it came about, we could talk a little bit more. I agree with some of the drafters, as Derek does, of the JDA about why the IHRA definition has been misused against speech about Israel. But I think one of the deficiencies is that it really doesn't give clarity in terms of issues about hate crime. It talks about attacking a synagogue. Well, sometimes synagogues are attacked for anti-Semitic reasons. Sometimes synagogues are attacked because it's a disgruntled employee. So I think there are things in each of the definitions that are useful, but to say one should answer every question about anti-Semitism is wrong. And I think we need to have a larger conversation about how we think about anti-Semitism beyond the definitions too.
Thanks, Ken. Derek, any response, or would you like to build off what Ken said?
Sure. I mean, I agree with Ken, first off, that no single document, whether it's the IHRA or the JDA, or there's another one out there called the Nexus document, I think, no single document should be adopted as, like the IHRA has. It's been adopted by governments, it's been adopted by state and national governments, it's been adopted by NGOs, it's been adopted by corporations, and it's done in a way it makes things easier for institutions. It's like, well, we don't have to worry about what anti-Semitism is, we're just going to adopt this document. I think that different institutions are going to have different conversations about what kinds of speech are allowed and not allowed. There's constitutionally protected speech in the United States, or in Canada, we have our charter rights. I'm actually in Canada at the moment, and I identify at least as much as a Canadian as an American, so I kind of have to go back and forth because it's two very different legislative traditions. Canada has a much lower bar for hate crime legislation. I mean, it's still hard to get convicted of hate speech in Canada, but there is such a thing as hate speech. And I don't think that any document produced by an NGO should somehow become law anywhere in the world. But what I do think is that the IHRA definition or the JDA can be good to think with. They can be thinking tools. And I do think that, if a synagogue is attacked, unless it was clearly a case of, a disgruntled employee or something like that, I think it's a good working assumption that it's a hate crime. I mean, it might turn out not to be, but, and that's something that the JDA does say, that it is hatred of Jews as Jews. It's quite clear about that at the beginning. The Jerusalem Declaration does make that distinction between, somebody, you get in a fight with someone who doesn't like you as a human being, or, because of some personal dispute, and you get into some kind of an altercation because of someone imputing to you certain characteristics because you are Jewish. And I agree about and I just want to make something very clear, because I'm unhappy with how the conversation about the IHRA versus the JDA has rolled out over the last several months. And I admit that, some people who favor the JDA, maybe they've been a bit hard on the IHRA definition, but I think the issue is not the definition itself. It's not the IHRA definition itself. It's how it's been used. And we all know the law is a living thing. It's not the piece of paper, it's how people read it. Because if you actually read the words, and I'm encouraging everyone who's listening and watching today, read both definitions. They're both available online. They're very short. If you read the IHRA, it leaves so much unsaid. It's actually quite vague in many ways. And what the JDA is trying to do is fill in some of those gaps. And that's my concern really about the IHRA so much, is what it doesn't say, or what it says in a vague fashion, which then people have used or instrumentalized to chill, I think, uncomfortable speech, but speech that might be very important, indeed necessary, particularly about Israel and about Israel-Palestine.
So, Ken, real quick, because
Sure.
we do have a super chat, and we try to prioritize these, and I think this will actually lead into what we're talking about. Rajia, thank you so much for the 24-pound super chat. Rajia goes, why does IHRA definition prevent me, a Palestinian, from describing my treatment by the Israeli state as racist? Any Jew can return homeland after 2,000 years in the diaspora, but I can't after 70. How's that not racist? I think this is a great question. I think that's why a lot of Palestinians, we do have a lot of our Palestinian community members in the chat today, and they find this conversation very interesting. A conversation about anti-Semitism they find to be very interesting because they feel like the term anti-Semitism has been weaponized against them when they're giving what they feel is very legitimate criticism of Israel. Ken, I know you did mention that you do think the definition's been abused. Is it referring to this specifically?
Well, it's referring to the as Derek said, how it's been used. Again, there were reasons why the Israel examples, including double standards, and which we can talk about a little bit more, and things like holding all Jews collectively responsible for actions of Israel, and things like denying Jewish right to self-determination, e.g. Calling the creation of Israel a racist endeavor. There was a reason why those things were included in the working definition, and I stand by them, because the definition was not to target any particular expression of somebody to say that they're an anti-Semite. Again, it was to take a temperature, particularly in Europe, over time and across borders, and we did see a correlation. I would never say a causation, but we did see a correlation between harsh criticism, including anti-Zionist criticism of Israel, frequently around, as we saw recently, hostilities with Hamas, or in other instances with Lebanon, with the other episodes. We did see an increase in hate crimes against Jews in cities. So you could I had a colleague in the UK who used to have a graph of mentions of Israel in the press and that type of attitude, and attacks on Jews, and can almost superimpose them. So we thought that was an important data point. But what happened, and Derek knows this, I started seeing in 2010 precisely the types of problems that your questioner asked about. We started seeing on the campus the utility of the definition. In the U.S., there's a law that talks about you could defund colleges if they create a hostile, intimidating, discriminatory environment, and Jews were included as of 2010. You started having these right-wing Jewish groups saying, aha, here's somebody teaching something, here's somebody saying something, just like your questioner asked, and they started using that as the basis of challenges to try to defund universities, to suppress speech. So that was the beginning, I saw, of the abuse of the definition, to go after individuals, which it was never intended to do. When I had, as you know, a recent book out called The Conflict Over the Conflict, the Israel-Palestine Campus Debate, and one of the reviewers, who generally was positive of the book, had something that I thought was absolutely right to reckon with. He criticized me for by saying basically, if it create a tool for hunting witches, don't be surprised if people use it as a witch hunt. And I think that's the problem. It's not the definition in how it was intended, it's the abuse of it for in political ways that are really disgusting in my view.
So do you support reforming the definition in such a way that it can't be abused as easily? No, that's part of my, I like aspects, and there are certainly things that are superior, I think, with the JDA definition. The Nexus definition I recommend as well. But I don't think it's a question I don't think definition should be used, say, on a campus, any definition. I mean, we wouldn't do that with racism. We wouldn't define racism as opposing affirmative action, or opposing Black Lives Matter, or not being in favor of defunding the police, or keeping statues up. You wouldn't have a definition with examples like that and say, we're going to police speech, we're going to encourage administrators to stop speech. You would never do that. So it's a question of not the text of the definition. It's a question of it's been abused in a way that's problematic. And that should be, that's why I agree with Derek. There should not be any institutionalizing in this in a way that's going to restrict speech of people who want to criticize Israel, even harshly and even in an anti-Zionist way. But people have cited the definition to go after people that talk about Palestinian rights, and maybe even in an anti-Zionist frame. That ought to be okay. That ought to be protected. It can be debated, but it should never be censored. Would you like to hop in,
yeah.
Derek?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the difference between what's actually written on the paper and then, how the IHRA definition's been used. So the questioner is asking, why is it a problem for me as a Palestinian who has suffered from Israel to call Zionism racism? I mean, of course you have the right to say that. And one thing that the Jerusalem definition does is it simply says that there are things that people can say about Israel, basically as long as you're not employing anti-Semitic tropes, you're not talking about Jews controlling the media, you're not invoking languages of Jewish conspiracies, you're not attributing to Jews, unusually violent, evil sorts of tendencies or behaviors. If you're talking about the action of a state, the state of Israel, and then operative ideology, and we know what's happening on the ground, what's actually happening on the ground in the occupied territories, that's, of course, people should be able to talk about that openly in a variety of settings. So this is something, again, that I found confusing about the IHRA definition, where it says right at the beginning, and defenders of the IHRA point this out over and over again, they say, well, the definition says criticism of Israel akin to that directed against any other country is fine. Well, okay, in the United States right now, there's a big debate about racism. There's a very powerful line of thinking in the United States that the country is structurally racist. This is a very important element behind BLM, Black Lives Matter, behind the 1619 Project, behind a variety of educational programs, that the United States is structurally racist. Now, there are other people who disagree, and it's become quite ugly in the United States, the debate about this. I'm in Canada, which is a much more low temperature sort of country in every way, but there has been a real debate in Canada for decades, if not centuries, about whether the countries should be one or two or three. I mean, there is a sovereigntist movement in Quebec historically that wanted to simply undo the country. And yet Quebecois separatists had the right to say Canada is an oppressive country and we have a right to our own country. People did not get thrown in jail or denied their free speech rights because they were separatists. We call countries throughout the world genocidal. We attack China for what it's doing to the Uyghurs. We attack Russia for invading, parts of Ukraine. We use all kinds of hostile language to describe countries the world over. So if we can criticize Israel the way we can criticize any other country, then we could call Israel racist. We could call Israel violent. We can call Israel oppressive. We can do all sorts of things. So again, I think that Ken has really put his finger on it. The IHRA was really useful as a way of sort of identifying things that are happening on the ground and assuming, yeah, that might very well have been the result of anti-Semitism for data collection, but to actually try to limit speech because of it. Not only is it wrong in and of itself, it actually contradicts the wording of the IHRA's own first couple of sentences. Criticism of Israel, akin to that leveled against any other country, is licit. Last but not least, South Africa was widely criticized for practicing apartheid until the early 1990s. Does this mean that one may call Israel apartheid? You don't have to agree that it's an apartheid country. Okay, you don't have to agree. But is it okay to say it? Because that kind of criticism has been directed elsewhere. So again, this is where I found the IHRA kind of irritating. Because on one hand, it seems to be allowing all sorts of free speech that would give the Palestinian questioner and lots of others say about Israel whatever you want, and then it seems to be trying to take it away. And that seems to be illogical.
Ken, you're on mute.
Yeah, I basically agree with Derek, but if I could add to it, that one particular bullet point of the working definition, I think, has been distorted from its original intent as well. It was intended to say, nobody would say of another democratic country that's getting rockets sent at them, they should just say, take it, we shouldn't do anything. I mean, you can argue about whether the response was appropriate or not, but nobody would say, that they shouldn't respond, which is what was happening, and some folks were saying. That was the genesis of that particular point. But people have been abusing it to say, well, if you're going to criticize Israel, why are you not also criticizing China and Tibet and all these other places? And, give me a break. When I was protesting for Soviet Jews, I wasn't, I was concerned about Tibet, but I didn't go to a protest about it. Did that mean that I was, being racist or prejudiced about it. So again, this has been weaponized is the problem. And the larger frame, to me, is the question of how definitions of anything should be used. I mean, we tend to, and this comes from my day job as a hate studies center, we tend to, when we have issues that touch on our identity and touch on things that we feel very strongly as social justice issues, there's a lot of social science that says we want to make it simple, we want to make it black and white, we don't like difficult, confusing ideas. We just want to put it in a box and either forget about it or condemn it. And that's what's happening with the idea of the definition. People are talking about how do we define it? What are the differences? Is it anti-Semitic or is it not? And we're missing so much that's critical about the discussion of anti-Semitism. But of course, we're trying to reduce it into this little box. I'll give you one example. Derek was talking about the U.S. If you look back at the recent period of time in the United States when Trump was president, and certainly anti-Semitism long preceded Trump, people are talking about, did he say things about Israel, about Jews, whatever. You look at the Tree of Life synagogue shooting. How did that come about? That came about because there was a guy named Bowers who was concerned at the time that Trump was talking about immigrants coming up from Mexico. And he decided Jews are responsible for this happening because Hayes had a meeting. I'm going to go shoot Jews. So, you don't look at the fact that anti-Semitism increases when you have leaders talking about us and them and vilifying them as a danger to us, and not about Jews. He was talking about Muslims and he was talking about Mexicans. And you don't think about anti-Semitism when you look at the Walmart shooting. Nobody would count that on even the metric that the working definition has. But the shooter that went into there and shot Mexican Americans and Mexicans had the same exact ideology as Bowers in Pittsburgh. He just chose a different target. So I think by talking about, is it anti-Semitism under this definition or that definition and the competing definition, we're missing so much that's essential about thinking about how anti-Semitism works and therefore how we should combat it.
Ken, can I jump in there? Because that's something actually that I liked about the Jerusalem Declaration right from the start, which is I feel like what happens so much among people who care about anti-Semitism, and again, I want to reiterate, I'm worried about anti-Semitism, okay? I worry about the attacks against Jews in Los Angeles and New York and London, and as well as, obviously what's happened in Israel. So I'm not making light of it. It's a question of how you frame it. There was a terrible hate crime last week in London, Ontario, where a man, rented a pickup truck and he ran over a family of 5 Muslims, Pakistani Muslims, killed 4 of them. It was a vicious hate crime. And one thing that the Jerusalem Declaration is very aware of, the authors are very well aware of, and Ken is pointing out, is that we're talking about a common concept of hate. And whether it is anti-Black racism or various forms of xenophobia or anti-Semitism, they are connected. And this is a really controversial issue because what's happening so much in the United States now is the debate about racism, about BLM. They're not quite sure what to do with Jews. But there is a tendency to bracket off anti-Semitism because Jews, for the most part, and I'm really qualifying that, for the most part, are perceived as white. I'm being very careful about my language. And many of them are more affluent than the national average. So I'm not using anti-Semitic language here. I'm just talking about a fact about Jews as a community. However, Jews do experience anti-Semitism. They do experience hatred. They do experience vandalism, verbal abuse, and sometimes physical violence. And it's very important for those who want to combat anti-Semitism to realize that this is not different from, this is part of a general struggle against racism. And this is a conversation we have to have within the Jewish community, within people who care about race and about hatred in general. And that's something that I think, I'm afraid, Jewish institutions have resisted. And there has been that tendency to see, to look at, for example, the more progressive members of the Democratic caucus in the House of Representatives as somehow hostile to Jews or There are differences of opinion, but we are dealing with a common problem, and we have to work together at a common solution.
Thank you. I do want to pick up this super chat real quick. Raja, thank you again. Raja goes, projecting the policies of the state of Israel and all Israeli civilians and all Jews is the real anti-Semitism. Criticizing the state of Israel is not Yep, I think there's consensus around that, at least amongst us three here. You know, Ken, you brought up an interesting point, how the social sciences often look to simplify definitions because then they're easier for people to understand and easier to use. And there's kind of a trade-off, because in simplifying, it's true that in simplifying it, it's easier to know how to use these terms, but then it doesn't really get to the gist of the complexities of these different forms of hate. What I would suggest is we can't simplify it too much, again, because then we don't fully understand it. But I think a solution is to not be too trigger happy with our accusations of these hate terms. So whether it's calling somebody racist, sexist, transphobe, or anti-Semitic, I think in general activists are way too quick to label someone as that without really, we don't give people the benefit of the doubt, understand where they might be coming from. Perhaps it's ignorance. Perhaps through a very short conversation, we could show them why their language is harmful. But when we have this culture of just calling somebody anti-Semitic or racist, not only do we overuse the term and kind of dilute its meaning because people no longer take it seriously, but we're not doing the real education in explaining to people why what they're saying is harmful. So I would suggest to people, if someone says something anti-Semitic, explain to them why what they said is wrong. Don't just call them an anti-Semite. It's going to be a much more effective way to change people's minds and educate people about these forms of hate.
Yeah, that was very well said, and I think we all, agree with that. The challenge is there are more and more pushes, and they come from both sides of the political aisles in the U.S. at least, to try to label people and try to stop speech and to define speech as something that people shouldn't hear. And that's one of the the concerns. I know Derek and I both work on college campuses, that we see some of this push to the idea that being disturbed by ideas is going to cause mental health problems for students who are essentially fragile and should never hear something they find disturbing. And I argue exactly the opposite, that we ought to be able to have discussions and people be disturbed by ideas, and that should be part of the purpose of college, is to understand how you think about things that you do find disturbing, and how to have the types of conversations that you're suggesting about, okay, this is why I find it disturbing, what's your evidence, and to have it calmly, as opposed to just writing somebody off as beyond the social contract of the college, calling them racist, and then harassing them, which I think is a horrible thing. But I see some of that happening over the definition, on campuses and elsewhere. And that's what troubles me.
It's, I can't tell if I'm, no, I'm not muted. This is a problem I've had in the classroom a lot with, let's say you have students from very protected backgrounds, and they get to the university and they hear for the first time some very bracing words about Israel, and they say it's anti-Semitism. There's a scholar I'd recommend anybody who's interested in this sort of thing who's watching. There's a guy in New York named David Engel who wrote a wonderful essay years ago where he said, I don't even want to use the word anti-Semitism because it describes so many things. You get kind of an insulting remark, or you're not allowed into a restaurant or a country club. Is that really, that's one form of hatred? But then, someone tries to kill you because you're Jewish. That's different. And there's arguments on both sides that, one could argue it's a slippery slope. And once you start saying or thinking discriminatory things about people, it could lead to violence. Or it could be that there's certain kind of social snobberies and prejudices that many of us carry in our lives. Some people are educable and some people aren't. And I actually found it very helpful when I was living in the United Kingdom. I was teaching at Oxford for a while, where there is more kind of ambient anti-Semitism than there is in the United States. And I found that Jewish students dealt with it differently. I mean, obviously they didn't like it, but they kind of knew better, I think, about the difference between a sort of a statement from ignorance, because a lot of these students had never met Jews before, and a statement that came from real animosity. And they were just a little better about how to deal with it. And, we're all sorry that life is difficult, but one of the aspects of living in a diverse society is dealing with difference and helping people overcome their fears of difference. And I agree with Ken that obviously this is easier maybe in a university environment, but it's something that would be good to carry over outside of the university.
We have another super chat from H. Refi, $2 Canadian. Thank you so much. Can speakers address cases like that in Toronto? And then they continue to say, referring to the JDL attack being mistaken for anti-Semitism. So I'm not familiar with that, but are you there?
This was an attack a few weeks ago during the latest round of violence in Gaza and in Israel. There were rumors. It's really fascinating because I live downtown, and there were rumors of like anti-Semitic riots on Bathurst Street. So it's these kind of old memories from like the 1930s when there were anti-Jewish riots in Toronto. And the story was, that, Jews had been attacked walking in the street. And then a few days later, it came out that it had been, and it's not quite clear to me who provoked who, but there were JDL people, Jewish Defense League. So they were looking for a fight and they got it. So that seems to be a case where people immediately leapt to pre-assumptions. And that particular incident wasn't as bad. However, there have been cases in Toronto, Montreal, all over the United States, North America, and Europe where there's been bona fide anti-Semitic violence. This is a case where it was exaggerated or provoked, but there have been plenty of bona fide cases. So this is not a made-up phenomenon. It might be exaggerated here and there, but it really is happening. And that's something that I think that just as I think people who are coming from, as it were, the quote Jewish side of the fence need to really be aware of how important it is to engage the Palestinian issue without being afraid of yes, people are going to say things about Palestine that are going to make many supporters of Israel uncomfortable. That's just going to happen because the reality is really uncomfortable and they need to deal with it. But also I think people in the progressive community have to understand that anti-Semitism is out there and it's real and it's making people frightened and it needs to be condemned.
Well put. I would say it has been concerning to many on the left to see kind of the either ignoring or just straight up justifying of anti-Semitism as okay, saying, but this is just a response to Israel, kind of blaming the anti-Semitism on Israel as if that makes it okay. And I think many left-wing Jews, which is the majority of Jews living in North America, are having a hard time right now because they feel like their own communities, who are generally social justice oriented, are kind of leaving them out. I hear that. There is
Can I jump in here for a second?
Sure.
I think that's an important point, and it's not unique because we see it on the right side of the political spectrum too. People tend to either supercharge allegations of anti-Semitism or dismiss it, depending on if the person we're talking about is seen as in their community in terms of their view of Israel. So, exact phenomenon give a pass to some people for things that if it had been said by somebody on the right, they would have been jumping. Some of the comments of Ilhan Omar were reminiscent to me of ones made by Pat Buchanan. And, people were, for a variety of reasons, some good, maybe some not, were giving her the benefit of the doubt that he would never have gotten because he was perceived as from a different point of view. Likewise, we saw Netanyahu and ZOA talking about how people like Orban and others who received as friends of Israel were, just wonderful people. And Orban was using classic anti-Semitic tropes of Soros in his campaigns. And you have the then Prime Minister of Israel saying he's a great guy because he's a friend of Israel, dismissing tons of anti-Semitism. And we see, concerns about allegations of anti-Semitism among anti-Zionists, but the people that are making that are ignoring some of the anti-Semitism among some of the Zionists, strongest supporters. So we tend to frame things in that different way. And to me, that's again part of the problem, why it needs to be a richer conversation as opposed to how do we weaponize it and beat up people we disagree with, and using these definitions as a tool, among others, to do that.
Thank you. I do want to take an audience question because it's actually by the person who helped set up this debate. Shout out to Zohar Einavici. Without him, this conversation would not have taken place. Zohar goes, can you please ask Kenneth whom did he refer to when he wrote right-wing Jews are weaponizing the IHRA?
Sure. in my book, I detail a lot about how the Zionist Organization of America, and there's a group called AMCHA, and a few others were trying to use the definition first on campus to stop or chill speech that they found disagreeable about Israel. So that's one, bucket of people that are using it. But then, the Simon Wiesenthal Center. I have great respect for some of the people there. I disagree with Mark Weitzman on this, but he was the one who pushed the adoption, or among others, he was probably the most important person who was promoting the adoption of the IHRA definition, the definition, for IHRA in 2016, and he put out a press release when an Israel Apartheid Week event was canceled in the UK because it was alleged to have violated the definition. And what he said was, this is great. Other universities shouldn't allow this either. First of all, the definition doesn't, in my view, outlaw Israel Apartheid Week in any event. But even if it did, it shouldn't be used that way. So there are the groups that are trying to, and I understand, if you step back and think about it, anti-Semitic tropes that may have relationship with Israel, you want to reduce them. But the way to do that is not to define certain speech that's beyond the pale, and that especially we're asking government to get involved in. In the UK, there was the education minister basically threatened the funding of schools that didn't adopt the definition, and that to me is incredibly, problematic. And we don't want to go down that road. It creates an environment where you really can't do anything except discuss, how the definitions are being used, as opposed to, again, how do we actually deal with anti-Semitism.
And to another example to support what Ken is saying is about BDS legislation that, people who, if a contractor to a state government in the United States, for example, is actively proponent of BDS, that somehow that person could not be, a possible candidate for a government contract. Now, these laws are, almost certainly unconstitutional. I think one of them's already been struck down just in the last couple of weeks. But just to even suggest such a thing, and I don't know who exactly was behind the lobbying, but when the German parliament, the Bundestag, declared the BDS to be unacceptable as a form of anti-Semitism, this is not helpful to, again, a conversation about Israel, Palestine that might be uncomfortable. And by the way, free speech includes the right to be inaccurate and includes the right to be wrong. So people can make mistakes. And there are people who think BDS is a great idea and other people like myself who don't think it's a great idea. But people have every right in the world to favor it and to engage in it. It is not violent. It doesn't break laws. And it's a form of civil disobedience. And so, why is it that we are now getting involved in trying to tell people what they can and cannot buy? This is, or that they cannot advocate for sanctions against a country. And to get to the issue of double standards, which is something I wanted to ask Ken about, actually, because you were involved in the drafting of the first IHRA iteration, I simply don't get what this means, because the wording of the IHRA is very strange. It talks about not holding Israel to standards that wouldn't be applied to any other country.
Any other democratic country.
Any other democratic country, which is odd, because I don't know of any other democratic country that's been occupying another people for 54 years. That is, the circumstances of Israel's creation and its existence are quite unusual. And so, of course, and also its location in the center of the the Muslim Christian world, there's going to be reasons why people do get more worked up about Israel, Palestine, than they do about other parts of the world that are not anti-Semitic, even though Israel is procedurally democratic. So I just don't understand what one was thinking when
Sure, and I think I addressed that a little bit before, but you're right, Derek. One of the things I learned from you is, again, each country is unique and each has things that compare to other places, and there are some certain things about Israel, as you pointed, that are unique from any other country. But the concern was, again, remember when was this drafted? This was drafted in 2004. So you had the history of the UN equating Zionism with racism between 75 and 91, and overt discrimination, including in the UK at universities. Some places you couldn't have Jewish student groups. groups, because to be a Zionist, you were a racist, and we don't allow racist groups.
Mm-hmm.
Then you had the World Conference Against Racism in Durban, which was an anti-Semitic orgy with, pictures of Jews with hooked noses and signs that Hitler didn't finish the job, and so forth. So that was the sort of background to it, and again, the idea was people were saying Israel should not have responded at all when it was attacked. And you would never, regardless of the unique circumstances of another country, you would never say that a democratic country has no right to defend itself. If somebody from Toronto was sending shells into Buffalo, nobody would say Americans shouldn't do anything about it. And that was the context. But again, as I was explaining before, it's been very distorted to basically say if you're going to criticize Israel for anything, you have to criticize some other things. So you're right. Again, the idea was what do we want to collect data from for reports, for analysis,
right,
and so forth, as opposed to do we want to label this anti-Semitic or not. It's one of the point I want to address too. There's another thing that's going on that I think that's affecting the dynamic of the discussion in the world about this among the Jewish community. So this debate inside the Jewish community is whether you have to have a particular attitude about Israel to be seen inside the tent. Sharansky and Gil Troy just wrote a piece, calling un-Jews people who are critical, if not now, and Jewish Voice for Peace and so forth. That's a debate inside the Jewish community of, do you need to have a particular attitude towards Israel to be in or out? What really troubles me about the push to adopt the definition, the working definition, and it would bother me too of any other definition, but this one in particular, as part of law, is you're asking the government to decide this internal question. And that's why you had Kushner at the time of the executive order taking the definition and applying it to the campus, saying, yeah, our policy is anti-Zionism, is anti-Semitism. And that's why you had Pompeo floating, we're going to label Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International anti-Semitic and destroy their funding. They're trying to answer a debate inside the Jewish community, and to have that happen, to have government decide essentially an internal religious question, is to me a really troubling thing.
It just sounds like in the Jewish community just like the whole world, the Jewish community still doesn't quite know what to do with Israel. That is, on the one hand, most Jews do have a connection with Israel. They feel attached to it in one way or another. It's certainly the most vibrant and if not already the largest, soon to be the largest Jewish community in the world. And yet, no one really knows what to do with a country in which Jews are now sovereign with military force, and a country that was created at the expense of another people and occupying another people. And it is tempting and easy, it seems, to then conflate hostility towards that country and anger at that country with anger against Jews broadly understood. And yes, of course it does when Jews in the streets of Paris get attacked because they're Jews, because someone's angry at Israel. This is clearly an anti-Semitic act. But what do we do? And I don't really have an easy answer to this, because it is very, I was at another event recently where someone pointed out, yes, I mean, you can say that this kind of very angry speech about Israel and apartheid and genocide or whatever kind of ethnic cleansing, very angry language people can use. You can say, well, it's directed towards Israel because Israel is a country that occupies another people. But yes, it is easy for that angry language to then escalate into violence, physical violence. And I don't have an easy answer to this, because I know that constitutionally people should have free speech rights, and that the conversation towards helping the situation can only move forward if people in the Jewish community acknowledge what's really happening on the ground in Israel-Palestine. But on the other hand, I am aware, as you were when you created this definition in the first place, that one kind of angry language can lead to violent actions. I don't know if you have insights about.
Sure. And again, I live in America. I'm arguing constitutional cases in court, and to me, the bottom line of this, of course, words can hurt and speech can hurt and could lead to things. So one of the objections. It was interesting that South Carolina adopted a version of the definition at one point, and it was contentious. And a rabbi said, why is this contentious? You know, Hitler didn't kill anybody with his hands. Words, of course, all he did was words, and words led to genocide. And how could we be against adopting something that would stop this type of speech? And the former general secretary of the American Association of University Professors and I wrote a response saying, yeah, you know, words can in fact hurt, but you can't ignore the fact that the reason that Nazi Germany was able to succeed so well in terms of its murderous plot against Jews is partly that it was suppressing dissent. And if you look at the question of, do you want to have the government decide what can be said and what can't be said, things that are not, you know, direct incitement, you know, immediate, go get that person over there, they're a Jew, that type of thing. The governments historically have decided to stop speech that they don't like. What was, you know, the Trump administration talking? They weren't talking about, you know, things other than Black Lives Matter speech. They were talking about, can we suppress some of that? So that's a very dangerous thing to give government that power. And then the larger frame is, again, you know, larger discussion, what should we be doing about combating anti-Semitism? I think there's a strong case to be made that there's a correlation between strength of democracy and the capacity to fight any form of hatred. And when democracy, you know, our institutions, free press, judiciary, so forth, are under strain, that makes it more difficult. So, you know, when we're trying to really give power to governments to be more autocratic in terms of deciding what speech is okay and what speech isn't, that to me is a prescription for disaster. It doesn't mean we're silent about the speech that we find hateful. It doesn't mean we don't educate it. It doesn't mean we don't, you know, lobby Congress and other places. It doesn't mean we don't, you know, support people who are going to make this a priority. You know, there are a whole bunch of things to do, but we try to simplify it, say, this is something we don't like. We think it could lead down the road to something. Let's suppress it. That's always historically going to backfire.
So we are going in on an hour. I do want to start taking audience questions. We have a few super chats. Maybe I'll address some criticism in the chat real quick. Nate, I see you're here. I see you're very upset that you got banned from Discord, and you're on a mission to expose me as a fraud. Well, I wish you luck on your mission. I mean, there's hundreds of hours of content that I'm doing. People will judge from themselves. I hope you don't let me live rent-free in your head. You were banned because you weren't acting it. You were just contributing to a toxic environment. Our Discord community is really a place to engage in productive conversations. But more than anything, you know, how you acted in getting banned, it just reinforces why you're not why we didn't want you in the community. You know, you could have taken a few days and relaxed and then reached out to me and said, Adar, I understand what you're saying, or I still disagree. We could have had a conversation, but lashing out like a child, you know, it just reinforces that you're just not right for a conducive, healthy environment that really works on reconciling between Israelis and Palestinians. So I'm sorry that you're hurt. I would suggest still, you know, taking time to reflect, reach out to me in a week. I'd still be happy to have a conversation with you about this. And if you want to dedicate your life mission to proving I'm a fraud, best of luck to you, bro. You know. Cool. We do have some super chats. Schuperman goes, the main form of anti-Semitism that worries me is the hyper-focus on this small Jewish state that is at least trying while ignoring the surrounding states who have run out most all of their Jews. And thanks for the $10, Schuperman. I really appreciate it.
Let me take a first crack at it, and then Ken. One is that I'm just thinking of some of those states. You know, Syria was under severe international sanctions. It was pretty much blown to pieces, largely thanks to its own violent government. Iraq was invaded by an international coalition. You know, in other words, Middle Eastern states that violate human rights, that behave badly, you know, there is a price to pay. It is true that Israel attracts more attention. That's true. I mean, Israel does attract a lot of attention in the world. And for people who are close to Israel, I can just tell you one thing. It's never going to end. It's never going to end, and anti-Semitism is part of it, but it is a small part of the story. It is, if the Jewish state had been founded in Tierra del Fuego, it may have been different, but it's in Palestine. It is in the Holy Land. It is in an area, you talk about location, location, location. Okay, and it's a state that the circumstances of its creation, the circumstances of its continued existence are unique. And that's just not going to end. And it is true that Israel is going to get criticized for its actions more, largely because of its connections to the Western world. There are more Western journalists stationed in Jerusalem, I think, than the entire Middle East put together. Everybody wants to hang out at the American Colony Hotel. They're maybe not as eager to go hang out in Baghdad. That's just not going to change. And I think it's important to understand when anti-Semitism is a factor behind that and when it's not. Anyway.
Yeah, and I agree with Derek. It's obviously the center of the three major faiths, so everybody has a focus on it. And the other thing that makes it a hot button issue is, as Derek was pointing out, it's sort of unique in the way that you have two strong narratives of national self-expression that are competing and possibly irreconcilable with each other, and that's going to make it a constant focus with people who care on one side or the other. So, I don't see it as anti-Semitism because it's disproportionate. There are certainly times where some of its focus could be anti-Semitic. One can raise questions about how some things in the Human Rights Council and other types of bodies that are supposed to look at global things disproportionately look at Israel and some of the things that are said there and make that case. But just in terms of general focus, I agree with Derek. It's going to be an important part of the world for Jews and non-Jews, for as long as there is in Israel.
Yeah, just to build on that. Wait, why am I hearing an echo? Okay. Just to build on that. I agree that we're not going to change the disproportionate attention Israel gets for many reasons. And I think if we want Israel to not get disproportionate amount of attention, we should focus on fixing the problems that are causing Israel to get disproportionate amount of attention. And I don't think it's true to say Israel's at least trying. One of my biggest critiques of Israel is that they have done very little to change an unsustainable and immoral status quo the past decade plus. And the critique of Israel goes way farther back than just a decade. I think we're not trying nearly hard enough. And me as an Israeli, who's someone who loves Israel, I want to see Israel improve. And I know that in improving Israel as a nation, that's the single best way to stop the disproportionate amount of attention. And it'll just make the country better in general, right?
Yeah, although one could argue, look, there are some people who are anti-Zionists or critical of Israel, no matter what Israel does. There is, a deep-seated what's called supersessionism in Christian theology, that the Christians somehow replace the Jews. And there are people who really hold on to this and who believe that there's just something fundamentally wrong with Jews having a sovereign state. And there's some people who are going to just think that no matter what. The other issue is, and I'm speaking now as a kind of a part-time international relations scholar, if Israel were the size of Ukraine, and if Israel had 150 million people, it might be able to act in a way that it can't. I'm not talking about morality now. I'm talking about just cold, hard pragmatism. Israel's actually a very small country with a small population. And yes, it has a strong army and it has nuclear capability. We all know what Israel can do and does. But at the end of the day, the project to maintain the occupation, the project to maintain Israel as it's been headed, particularly in the last 15 years, is not sustainable. And you never know when the crash is going to come. It's like the crash that brought down the Soviet Union. All the Sovietologists were taken by surprise. Just a few weeks before this latest round of violence in Gaza and within Israel, I was talking to my class on war in the modern world that, wow, things in Israel seem to have calmed down. And I said to them, for the moment, you never know when the next thing is going to happen. It's just not sustainable. So I think for those of you who are watching who are not impressed by the moral arguments, although I think they do matter, there's also the pragmatic arguments.
Well said. We have another super chat from IHRA, $5 Canadian. Thank you so much. I think a lot of Palestinian activists are frustrated by how one-sided the concern is. People chanting death to Arabs in Jerusalem are ignored. So if you're referring specifically to this conversation, I mean, we're talking about anti-Semitism. So, I mean, this is certainly going to be one-sided in terms of what form of hate we're talking about. I'm trying. I guess I'm trying to understand what vantage point you're looking at it from. Maybe perhaps a Muslim in Canada, you think that if there was anti-Semitic remarks, that would create greater waves than this. I'm not quite sure exactly what you're referring to. Maybe Derek can.
Well, I'm not quite sure either, but the point is, I agree with at least what I take from the question is that sometimes we don't focus on the question of bigotry towards Arabs and Palestinians in some of the pro-Israel community. There's an ignoring of the Palestinian narrative. There's a dismissing of the understanding of the pain of the Nakba and how Palestinians were displaced and dispossessed. And that's again, people are approaching this question, the difficult question, not of how we look at anti-Semitism, but what to do in Israel, primarily from the point of view of their own sort of tribal allegiance. And to me, as somebody concerned with issues of hatred, the fact that we don't look significantly at those types of things, or we try to dismiss them, or that's a problem. I think we need a single standard. And that's again part of my concern about the trying to institutionalize a definition of anti-Semitism. If you follow that through, should there be a definition of anti-Palestinianism? As again, I said, I don't think this should be a doctrinal definition that's government endorsed, but you could say, there certainly are manifestations in the debate over Israel and Palestine that reflect that type of bigotry, and we shouldn't ignore it. It does exist.
Well, Ken, kind of a textbook case for the things you teach about at Bard. Over the last couple of years, downtown Jerusalem has become a kind of a sharks and jets site for these violent attacks. And you get Jews being attacked by East Jerusalem Palestinians, but the other way around, Palestinians are getting attacked by Jews. And these sort of street fights, and it can get really ugly and violent. And what's interesting, the question says, why don't we hear about it? It depends on who you read. So if you read the Middle Eastern press, you certainly hear about it. If you read a lot of, Western newspapers, well, not so much European ones that tend to be more critical of Israel, but American ones that are more sympathetic to Israel, it doesn't really get much of a mention. And that's the other thing, which gets us really back to the JDA and the IHRA, which is what the JDA is trying to do, is to open this discussion of anti-Semitism to the world as a whole. We have a global problem of various forms of hatred. And the fact that individuals just seem to care about only, their group. So if, Jews are getting killed, then that's who we care about if we're Jewish. And if Palestinians are being killed, then we somehow excuse, well, if Jews are being killed, that's just because of the occupation. These ways of thinking, if you're talking about your whole endeavor here is about reconciliation, we have to understand that sorrow crosses ethnic and religious lines. And, I've often heard it said in universities that Palestinian voices are not present. They're present. Palestinians are speaking up, and the question is, who's listening?
And the model for this, I mean, to put an emphasis on both of your points, is that I think it's important for individuals in our daily lives to reflect on what's called basically emotional empathy, to have the imagination to think, okay, if I were born in a different circumstance, how would I look at the world? Would it be somewhat different? And it's not just on this issue. I mean, a few years ago in the U.S., I decided, I get most of my cable news from CNN and MSNBC, and I said, that's really wrong. I should be looking at Fox News. Now I'm looking at One America Network and other sort of right-wing media, not because I agree with it. I find most of it disturbing, but there's millions of people that are swayed by that and that reflect their point of view. And how can you live as a global citizen and not understand that there are other people who may not have animus in their heart, but have a different point of view and a different reference point, and to try to understand that. I think it's an important exercise for all of us.
So we're going to take, we have a few questions in our community BBS. For those who are unfamiliar, BBS is kind of like Reddit, but built on blockchain technology. You actually earn money for creating content there. And it's censorship resistant because it's built on blockchain. So we have a few questions there. I just dropped a link to the BBS in the chat. This was asked by Lelouch. Why should the world adopt IHRA instead of JDA, despite Palestinians and pro-Palestinian concerns over IHRA making most criticism of Israel, whether it is legit or not anti-Semitism? So I feel like we actually did address this. So Lelouch, if you watch the beginning of the episode, we speak about this thoroughly. And this is an interesting one. This is by Jordan. Can philo-Semitism be anti-Semitism? So for those who are unfamiliar, philo-Semitism is thinking highly of Jews, which I think, like China, is a very philo-Semitic society. When I was there, and I would tell people, I was there for business, I would tell people I'm Jewish. They're like, you're very smart. I'm like, oh, yeah, thanks. I personally wasn't, I wasn't offended by philo-Semitism in any way, shape, or form. I found it flattering, but I'm very interested to hear what Derek and Ken think of it.
Well, yeah, I think it can. I mean, it reflects sometimes some of the same anti-Semitic tropes, but expressed in a positive way. And as I explained earlier in this conversation, you had debates about whether when a Jew was kidnapped and tortured, and held for ransom because Jews were seen as rich, there was a debate in France whether that was a positive stereotype, that's important. I'll give you another example. It's why I think, the hate crime aspect of the IHRA definition is much better because it again looks at intent rather than motive. So there have been cases, for example, in Montana years ago, if I recall correctly, where somebody was burglarizing Jewish homes. Why? Jews were rich. It's still, if you know that only the Jewish homes are being attacked this way and burglarized, of course it's a concern. You don't know what's in the person's mind. So I think the idea of a positive attitude about Jews can certainly be anti-Semitic. And there's another aspect too of the hate crime thing, which I want to mention, which I think is important too. It's not just about Jews. If you look at some of the worst anti-Semitic incidents, there was a shooting at the JCC in Kansas City a number of years ago. It wasn't Jews who were killed. It was non-Jews who happened to be using that facility. If you look there was a protest against a Jewish store on 125th Street in Harlem years ago, Freddy's Fashion Mart. Somebody was killed, wasn't Jewish. So it's not just a question of anti-Semitism, affecting Jews. The way that the hate crime rubric under the working definition was created is it would encompass all that. The challenge of the people that are promoting the definition is they're saying, well, great, we're institutionalizing. You look at the various EU states, they haven't adopted that sort of rubric, and I hope that they will, at least in terms of this clear aspect of talking about what do we want to count as a hate crime. I don't think they should adopt these other types of the definition to deal with speech, but on this matter, I think it's this one's superior.
It's a funny thing about philo-Semitism. I was just thinking about two very different types of it. The kind I've encountered in China, Adar, which is like what you're describing, where it was like, wow, you're Jewish. Because I wrote a book years ago about Jews and economics, and I gave a copy to a certain important Chinese figure. And he said, oh, you Jews, you're so rich, you're so successful. And I realized there wasn't a hint of animus. I mean, not a hint of anger or frustration or envy or anything. And if he learned the truth, which is, in fact, I'm terrible with money, he wouldn't be angry at me. He would just say, oh, nebech. I mean, he would sort of say, oh, well. Whereas I think the dangerous kind of philo-Semitism, which you find in Europe in particular, and amongst certain Christian circles in the United States, is based on expectations. And if those expectations don't come through, then you get angry. So, for example, evangelical Christians who expect Jews to do their part in moving to Israel, supporting Israel, to bring about the coming of the Messiah. And there's a new film called Till Kingdom Come, which is a really good documentary about evangelical Christians. And the anger underneath the so-called love of Israel, which is you Jews aren't doing your part. And if you're not doing your part, then you're all going to hell. Or what Donald Trump said yesterday, again, he said, you Jews, you don't love Israel enough. That's your problem, right? Because otherwise you would have all voted for me. That's the kind of philo-Semitism that's very dangerous, as opposed to what I encountered in China, which was just admiration. Again, it's not a Christian culture or a Muslim culture. Jews are completely or almost completely foreign to that culture, and they don't have the cultural baggage that it has in the Muslim and Christian world.
Great. Another super chat for Mark Shatton, $12. Thank you so much, Mark. Demonization of Israel seems to rise to anti-Semitism, and demonization of Palestine seems to rise to a similar bigotry. Thoughts of using demonization as a standard in evaluating these matters? I'm not fully sure I understand. Derek, you seem to, you understand?
I'm smiling because this is Ken's rubric. This is Ken's backyard.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, there's certain aspects we get demonization. I mean, when you talk about hatred, and the field of hate studies, it looks at dehumanization and demonization as indicias of that. So demonization is related. The reason I'm smiling is in my book, I have examples of precisely what the questioner is talking about. People on each side making strong arguments why the other side, pro-Israel or pro-Palestinians, are Nazi equivalents. But that's, again, it's how we understand about hatred. When we want to not engage and wonder, gee, should we look at this differently? How would the other person have a point of view that might be reasonable? We might be fundamentally disagreeing with it, but it's much easier, especially when it threatens our core values and identity, to say it's beyond the pale, and then that can lead to dehumanization and demonization. So, it's not unexpected that that's part of this discourse, and it happens on both sides because it's easier to understand the world that way.
Thank you. Let's see if there's anything else. I saw a few more. We're asking, do you think BDS is anti-Semitic? Why or why not?
Want me to take that first, Derek? Or
yeah,
actually, the JDA references that, and the IHRA doesn't.
Yeah,
I'll let you go first.
It's true that IHRA doesn't mention it, although people think it does, but it doesn't. Look, like I said earlier, I think there's a difference between being, in my opinion, wrong or mistaken and being anti-Semite. Free speech gives you the right to be wrong. Now, there are lots of people who think BDS is the right thing to do. Okay? And as I said earlier, I think it's wrong. But I see no reason why people shouldn't be allowed to advocate it if they wish. I mean, if people want to boycott China, or good luck, given how much we depend on Chinese merchandise, but people want to boycott China because of what they're doing to the Uyghurs, or if people want to boycott Saudi Arabia or whatever country, you can do it. So I just don't see why there's anything fundamentally demonic or violent or hateful about BDS. There are lots of Jews who believe in various forms of boycott, let's say not wanting to buy products from the occupied territories. According to Israeli law, such people could technically be barred admission into the state of Israel, but non-Israeli citizens, that is, under the boycott law of 2017, I think it was. But, I just don't see it that way, that the boycott movement in and of itself is an expression of, it's an expression of civil disobedience. The fact that I personally think that it's wrong-headed, that it's counterproductive, that it won't work, and so on. These are my own opinions. And I'd be very happy to have conversations with people about the BDS movement and, why I and a lot of other people who care a lot about Palestine don't think that it's, as it's currently structured, it's at all practicable or helpful. But that's just a matter of opinion. So no, I don't think the BDS is inherently anti-Semitic, and the Jerusalem Declaration says that quite explicitly.
Right, and I agree with Derek. I mean, I'm against BDS. I'm no fan of it, but I don't believe it's inherently anti-Semitic. The reason why some people think it is, and is that not necessarily the kid who's going to boycott something on a campus or push a resolution, but the movers and shakers of the BDS movement are very clear in terms of their anti-Zionism. And for those who equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, it's not such a large leap to say, therefore, BDS is anti-Semitic. Since I don't believe all anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, I don't agree with them, although I understand their point of view. And in particular, I think I'm, again, like Derek, I'm less offended if somebody wants to boycott something from the West Bank or Golan wines or whatever. What really sticks in my craw is the particular thing about the academic boycott. Again, I don't think it's anti-Semitic, but I think it's incredibly, incredibly dangerous. The whole purpose of the academy is to look at ideas and examine them without saying we're going to put certain ideas beyond the pale because it's tied to a particular nation. And so to me, that's reprehensible, not because it's anti-Semitic, but because it's destroying one of the fundamental things about academic freedom that's so important to our progress as a world.
There's something particularly galling about the way the academic boycott is structured, that the people who are considered, let's say, the people in Israel who are most, I'd say, not helpful, but who are helping promote the occupation, people in, I don't know, cybersecurity, people in military sciences, people in intelligence, people in computer science, people in the applied sciences, they're not affected by the boycott at all, because there's so many venues for them to go and speak and go and do consulting work all over the world. The people who are affected are actually those in humanities and the light social sciences. So, you boycott historians and comp lit professors. Well, that's not going to really bring about the liberation of the Palestinian people by boycotting somebody who teaches Welsh literature. And the BDS movement claims that it only boycotts initiatives between universities as opposed to individuals, but this is simply not true. I know from personal experience people who are constantly being subject to this boycott. And also the government initiatives that are protested are often very helpful. There are initiatives at Oxford, where I used to teach, between Oxford and certain Israeli universities, that bring the most amazing variety of people to Oxford, most of whom are extremely critical of Israel. And Oxford would be impoverished in terms of pro-Palestinian voices if they didn't have these programs. So I do agree. The academic boycott is a good example of something which is not anti-Semitic. It's just wrong, in my opinion. And the two are not the same.
Noam Chomsky, I believe, also came out criticizing that aspect of BDS, that that there's an academic boycott, and that B, that it was a very broad and general boycott of all of Israel and not just settlement goods, for example, which would have been more specific and directed.
Right, and it does have an impact that may, be felt as anti-Semitic. I document in my book, and Carrie Nelson has also done the sort of yeoman's work on this, about some Israeli academics who are hiding their affiliation to get papers published, or if they have a hyphenated name and one of the part of the hyphenated name is colon, they will drop that out. So it is having an impact on Jewish academics as well, which is problematic.
Great. So we're closing in on an hour and a half. I think we could do final thoughts and then wrap it up. Who wants to go first?
Oh, I can. I mean, first of all, I want to give a plug to Derek's book on Herzl, which, if nobody has read that, it's a great book on Herzl. So, and it's a pleasure to be, part of this conversation. I think the larger issue I hope people come away from it is that people can have differences of opinions about definitions and so forth, and the more, I think, the merrier. We should be talking about anti-Semitism and how we understand it. The fact that there are competing definitions and people care about it so passionately is partly a reflection about the fact that anti-Semitism is really a complex thing, and there are different ways of looking at it, and we should expand the conversations. And I think all the definitions really looked at together can help some of those conversations. And when I teach about it on the campus, I do use as many definitions as I can to stimulate conversation. But that's quite different than the larger question of what we want these definitions to do. And again, because this is such a difficult political, emotional issue for so many people. They're taking the definitions and using them as weapons. So that, to me, is the problem. I think the JDA definition is a contribution. I think it will reduce some of the temptation to abuse the working definition as a way to engage in witch hunts, and I think that's a positive contribution. But I don't think any definition should be used as a gatekeeper on a campus or another institution to say what's okay and what isn't. You can point to it in the discussion, but when you're encouraging administrators and other people in official positions, when you're encouraging official adoptions of what language is okay and what isn't, you're sacrificing so much, including especially on a campus. You're basically saying to people, groupthink is much better than individual agency. What we want to do is convince people that they should think for themselves and not follow the herd.
Well said, Ken.
I guess summing up, and again, Ken's book, The Conflict Over the Conflict, is must reading. It's a great book. I don't have a copy of it here because I'm at my son's house and he's a doctor. So if you want a book on cardiology, I can show you a few. But I think I'll spare you.
It's probably more helpful.
I think I'll spare you. For those who are viewing, who are coming from, let's say, I'll talk to two broadly sort of defined groups. Those who are coming from a, let's say, pro-Israel perspective. There are people who have criticized the Jerusalem Declaration as like giving a pass to anti-Semitism, being anti-Semitism, because it does try to encourage people to have difficult conversations about Israel, Palestine, without being called anti-Semites. But as I've said throughout, and I just want to emphasize, the people I know who signed the declaration, the people I know who wrote the declaration are awfully worried about anti-Semitism. So it's not like, they just don't care. For people who are pro-Palestinian or Palestinian, there have been some criticisms of the Jerusalem Declaration that it's basically trying to tell Palestinians what they can and cannot say. And we've seen the questions today. There were Palestinians involved in the crafting of the definition. So it's not like Palestinian voices weren't present. And I think that this is part of the ongoing effort of the people behind the Jerusalem definition to engage more with Palestinians, to have the next round of conversation about moving forward. And I myself am engaged with Palestinian scholars on these issues. So I'm just saying that it's not an attempt to censor or to tell people what to think. A final argument or final point I want to make is that if people have questions, again, about these two documents, I just can't encourage you strongly enough, read them and make up your own mind, because people who support the IHRA have made the most outlandish criticisms of people who support the Jerusalem Declaration that were, starry-eyed idealist academics who have no idea what the world is really like, when in fact most of those critics are themselves academics. And the fact is that whether people who support the JDA and who support the IHRA are often the same kinds of people. For example, living in Israel, all of them facing the same problems, the same challenges of living with Israel or living in the United States in very similar situations. So I'm just saying that it's not a question of idealistic, naive people versus experienced ones. It's just two very different ways of evaluating a real problem and what's the best way to move forward. So to avoid, again, we're talking about avoiding demonization, avoiding the demonization of people who support one or the other, to realize that both of them have emerged in, as Ken says so well, particular contexts, and to read for yourself and make your own decisions.
Thank you so much, Derek. Thank you, Ken. I thought this was an amazing session. I'd love to have you both on for future discussions. It seems like the chat very much enjoyed it as well, aside from a select few troublemakers, but I'm glad y'all are here as well. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe. You can find all the contact information for Derek and Ken in the description if you want to get in touch with them. You can also find their full bios to learn more about them. Yeah. Oh yeah.
I disappeared for a while.
Yeah, I'm gonna stand for 15 minutes longer. Just to I'll take some questions myself and maybe address the chat a little bit. But Ken and Derek, thank you so much, and I hope to see you both again here soon.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Maybe next time we'll do it in person, Derek, with scotch in hand.
That'd be great.
You bring the scotch. I'll bring the food. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Care. Good. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Okay, that was cool. I have a little bit of a different background here. I'm in a hotel right now. Cool. So I do see that there are a few people in the chat that been pretty consistent in their criticism of myself or of the channel. I want to give you the opportunity to come on the live stream and speak to the Sulha audience. Share your criticism. I'm definitely open to this. We could have a conversation about it. So Nate, if you're still here, come on. Let's have a discussion. Mossad, I know you've been very vocal. You can come on. Let's talk about it. I know sometimes it's easier in the comments. Let's push back. You know, it might be easier to just type it out. But if you want, I'm willing to give you an opportunity to use this platform to criticize this platform. So do we have any takers on this? Right in the chat, and we'll bring you on. This is a criticize Sulha session. We'll give it probably 15 minutes, and then we'll sign off. I do see HRA, thank you so much for another super chat, HRA. I know I didn't even get to address all your super chats. The chat was openly bigoted against Arabs. Address. We do have a select few people who are they have hateful or at least inflammatory rhetoric. That's true. The most hateful people we do eventually ban. But we do believe that people have the ability to change, so we don't want to just outright ban people. We want to give them the opportunity to be here and engage with people from opposing sides. So that's where it comes from. We're way more strict on Discord. Discord, you know, we have like a community there. If people just aren't contributing to a positive environment, then they will be removed. In our year plus of doing this, we've only banned like 10 people from the actual channel. So we're not quick to ban people. We do give people timeouts, which is like a 5-minute breather when you can't speak. Yeah, that's that. No, Nate, you don't need to put a camera on. You could just do audio if you want to join. That's fine. You can do just audio. How do you join the Discord? So I will drop a link, but the Discord now, it's not that it's invite only, it's that it's to be part of like the greater community. There's like an approval process just because we want to balance out the demographics a little bit. We have way more Jews than we have Palestinians, and the majority of the Jews are actually diaspora Jews. So we're trying to build a stronger Israeli-Palestinian presence there. So Nir, you asked about the Discord. If you are Israeli, then yeah, we'll let you right in. Diaspora people, we're going to wait a little bit before we let more people in. Rajya, criticism of Sulha, not enough female voices from both sides, too many men. True. Yep, I agree. The way we do our booking, generally speaking, booking is one of the hardest things we deal with. It's a lot of like research and email writing, and the vast majority of the emails we send, we don't get responses. A lot of the people on the show are people who reach out to us wanting to come on, and that's overwhelmingly men. We've had maybe one woman reach out to us saying she'd like to be on the show, and we've had probably over 20 men, which is a crazy discrepancy just in outreach. Is this a result of something cultural? I'm not quite sure, but this is a clear example how often when you, and this is something that the social justice oriented left often do, they look at like discrepancy, like an inequity in outcome, and they conclude that that must be a result of racism or sexism. But as we see, there's cultural and perhaps even biological differences between genders, let's say, that create a different outcome. So you can't look at outcome and conclude that it's a result of some kind of hate or bias. There could be other underlying cultural aspects. That being said, I very much agree we do need more women on the show. We've been making an effort to reach out to many women, and we still don't have enough. We do hope to change that in the future. Rajya, I by and large agree with your criticism, and thanks again for yet another super chat. Not to mention you're our one and only champion member. Maybe one day we'll have another champion member. You can find the Discord link in the chat. in the description. So yeah, I do see Nate. You want to join? Let me drop you the link. I'm gonna send it to you in. Nate, I just dropped the chat. I just dropped the link in the chat. You add that, join that link, and I will bring you on. Mossad, if you want to come on, you can as well. I think we'll do one at a time, just so we could have a nice back and forth. So we'll bring Nate on first, and then Mossad on. Hi, Rifai. I see you're here. Do you have a critique? Because we're doing a criticism session. Yeah, write it in the super chat. I can't hear you until I bring you on. I see people joining. I guess this is gonna be a long one. Chen Fro goes, "Hey Adar, I'm an Israeli woman. Would be happy to come on at some point. Not sure what to talk about." Chen, we'd love to have you on. If you can reach out to me on Discord or Facebook or any of my social media platforms, you can find a link in the description. Please reach out to me. We'll set it up. You see, Raja, your question inspired action, so thank you for that. Here, I'll bring. Hey, man. Yeah, I could hear you. What's going on?
Okay, good. So my issue with part of this is, by the way, I'm coming from Montreal, Canada. I've been involved with some of the organizing for the pro-Palestinian side of this locally, and I wanted to mention that there's an issue of framing sometimes with this issue, and obviously this was a topic of anti-Semitism, and it is something that should be between the Jewish community. But there's also this issue of the way that the conversation is framed around whose protection is valued and whose isn't. So, for example, when I bring up the example of Toronto, I've been on the streets of Montreal with somebody. For example, my friend was threatened with a gun, where somebody spat in somebody else's face and almost caused a riot, which I had to break up. There's examples of what, like, the realistic things of actually what happens. And I don't think that it is anti-Semitic for the crowd to try to beat up somebody who spat on someone, for example. That's not a case of that. That's a case of provocation and response. Anti-Semitism is unprovoked actions against people for being Jewish. That's kind of the whole point, right? And when it gets mixed in with this, when the crowd is being vilified because of provocations, which should not be responded to, but are. For example, there's provocations in the chat, for example, where they're talking about how, like when I'm mentioning how there was chance of death to Arabs, the responses were, well, okay, sure, let's go for it. Like that, they're okay with it, basically. And if I understand it's hard to moderate a chat and a debate at the same time, but if you're okay with those people and it's not an instant ban for people who are troublemakers, as you point out, it's going to lead to people not being around, like not wanting to engage.
Okay, I hear you. I agree. I think probably the solution, and honestly, there's no good reason why we haven't done this until now, because we do have enough volunteers. What we should do is we just should have more external people moderating the chat, so it's not on me, because the multitasks makes it very hard. And yeah, we should probably, I don't know if per se ban people outright, but mute them the second that they're acting hateful. Yeah, I hear you. I appreciate that.
Sometimes
I appreciate that feedback.
I totally agree, and sometimes it is like a question, but a lot of what was in that chat was not a question. It was just outright, you guys are evil, hateful people. And I was making jokes in the chat, I don't know if you noticed, where I was basically like, yes, Palestinians thirst for the blood of blonde children, that sort of thing. And that's obviously, like, I was just playing around with that because, I'm trying to make fun of their rhetoric, but like there needs to be somebody to point out when something is inappropriate and when it isn't. And I think humor was the only way to, like, even moderately moderate what they were doing.
I hear you. Thank you, H. I'm going to bring Nate on because I do want to hear from him as well. But if you'd like to come on at a future date for another session, you're more than welcome to. And I appreciate the feedback.
I can give you my email if there's some private way of providing it.
Yeah, in the description you can find my contact information. So just reach out to me on whatever social media platform you're most comfortable with.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Great, H. Thank you. Nate, what's going on?
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm happy we're getting to talk with voice and not over text. Where
Yeah, it wasn't so pleasant yesterday when I was watching the video and you said people like to hide behind these things. Not people don't like to hide behind these things, but sometimes people aren't given a platform, and you assume that they just want to hide behind things, but when they're offered a platform, then they agree. So you're like sort of like you're like assuming things about people. You make a lot of comments like that, like snide comments that assume things about people and generalize people, and it's not right.
So I would agree with you that I engage in a fair amount of snark with the chat, and this is something I've reflected on.
Yeah, and even after I don't mean to go you. I'm not good at this, by the way, because I'm not a public speaker. You're obviously, you've been doing this for a while. You're educated in this. Some people don't want to be on the camera and don't want to be in the session and want to express their opinions, and they have every right to. And it's not a negative about them that they're hiding behind a keyboard or they don't want to show themselves. You say a lot of insulting things that aren't right, and then when someone says something back to you, you say, "Oh, you're banned. You're not acting in good faith." It's like kind of ridiculous.
So I want to first address the first thing you said, and then move to the second. So it's true that I do engage in snark with people in the audience. And this is something I have internal reflection on, because I often say to myself, maybe I should be more compassionate towards those people. And honestly, it's quite possible that is a better approach. The reason I engage in snark is, I guess, two reasons. First of all, it's generally towards people who come every single week and are just pretty nasty. Like Nate, I haven't, today was my first time addressing you on the live stream. It's more so Star Hopper, who literally comes and says racist shit every single week.
I haven't.
No, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about, normally the snark's not directed towards you. It's directed towards people who are here every week. Wait, let me just finish, and are just nasty.
Sure.
And I also recognize that it has like some entertainment value to it. Like it's just fun and funny. So I see it as like a fair trade-off. I'm like, you know what? These are people who are obviously trolls. The people who I call out on live chat, it's not people who have their photo up or their full name. I'm not going to call those people out because I don't want to publicly shame anybody. But if you're hiding behind a fake profile picture and a fake name, and you're just coming to the chat to be mean to people, so I use that for entertainment purposes. I could definitely hear the case that I should still be more compassionate to those people. Again, I have this internal reflection. I do see snark as being acceptable with those people, but I'm open to the feedback that there is a better approach, and I consciously do recognize that. Now, to say that I respond with criticism, with banning, I mean, this cannot be farther from the truth.
And I interject one thing.
Sure.
The moment I joined the server a few days ago, I was immediately like jumped on and put into a breather. I didn't even know what a breather. Nobody said anything to me. Nobody said, "Oh, can you try?" No, so I was just put in a breather, and I figured, "Oh, maybe the breather after the Sabbath, I'll go on. I'll be off the breather." It was a day later. I was still on the breather. Nobody explained to me why I was on the breather. Nobody explained to me, "You're going on the breather." There is nobody. I know I read the principles, whatever, afterward, but still, like I could have. I assumed that I was on the breather for indefinitely, and nobody said anything to me. So from that moment on, I was already joining. It was in bad faith. The whole thing was in bad faith against me. And then I'm mad. Everybody's looking at every single thing I say after that. Because, oh, this guy is this guy's that, this guy's it, and like. I feel, it just wasn't, it takes people like, there's a certain amount of time. It takes a person to get, someone would have said to me, you can't use that language you said, or this and that. And then I say to them, oh, but this person said that to me first, and this, and whatever they said. But at least there's a conversation. Like from the moment I joined the server, I felt like I was totally like treated unfairly. You even told me, I was treated unfairly. And then also the final straw that broke the back, I guess, was I was engaging with you in an emotional debate about something that I take seriously, and it was about it wasn't like a serious thing, but it was about a profile pic, and you were going back and forth with me about it, and I was trying to show you how your logic wasn't like standing up, and instead of you were engaging with me, and then you just banned me in the middle of the conversation. It's like totally like you could expect someone to feel like they're being like treated unfairly and silenced, and maybe you have other things going on. There are other people telling you other things on the side that are, but like it's like from my position, I felt like very, very abused and very, very treated unfairly, and I'm not the only one who felt that way. There are other people on your server who felt the same way, that I was being treated unfairly. So it's like everything rests in your interpretation, whether someone's acting in bad faith or not, or whether you think someone's misinterpreting what other people are saying. So like, then expect pushback, when people are silenced, because it's just, you say you don't ban people quickly. I was banned pretty quickly.
Yeah, so let's talk about that.
Okay.
First of all, I do agree the first time you were put on a breather, you were treated unfairly. Not that I think that your behavior was okay, but you were reacting to somebody who engaged in a personal attack against you, and that should have been taken into context. One of the reasons why you were unbanned was because I felt like you were treated unfairly. I had a discussion with other mods. Some of the other mods were not okay with me bringing you back, and I said again.
Of course not.
Right. So I said again, I think you were treated unfairly. You deserve another chance. That actually caused one of the mods to quit, which upset me.
I think that was
now
your decision making here. Like you're taking emotional things that upset you, and then
hold on. Wait, Nate. Let me finish. Nate, let me finish. Come on.
Okay.
We're having a back and forth.
Okay, so it's back and forth.
So it's true that when I banned you the second time, me being upset that one of the mods quit was definitely part of why I was
I could tell that.
Short with you. That's true. It's not though. It's not about disagreeing with me, or disagreeing with something I say, or disagreeing with something another community member says. We want disagreement. That's what we are all about. People disagreeing with me helps me grow. So I urge debate and criticism and feedback. So again, it has nothing to do with that. But I will acknowledge it did have something to do with the fact that Ahmad left because of my decision to bring you back. And part of how you were engaging, hold on real quick.
Why weren't you honest about that and told me that that's part of it? You're telling me other reasons. You're not telling me the true reason. I knew there was other
but
there are other motivating factors behind your decisions that you're not being honest about, and that's clouding the whole thing. You're telling me one reason, and the thing that's in your heart is a different reason.
No. Nate, please let me finish. I wasn't interrupting you when you were speaking. Okay. It's true that was a factor, but that was not solely the reason. It's that I saw continued behavior that didn't give me confidence that you're going to be a productive member of the community. And you were doing something that I've experienced in the past, and I can't even begin to explain how emotionally draining it is when somebody constantly is misinterpreting what you say, because you need to constantly re-explain yourself. It's just, if we're going to have a community of people who misrepresent and misinterpret one another, that is just a horrible community, and that's what you were doing. So true. Wait, hold on, real quick.
Show me that.
True.
Show me that. Don't just make accusations without showing me proof of where I misinterpreted. It's very easy to throw out something and say, "Oh, you're misinterpreting people." Can you show me some examples where I misinterpreted people instead of just throwing that out there, please?
Yeah, I mean, you want me to do a screen share right now and go through it?
You could give me one example or two. I mean, give me a break. You're just saying
something. So okay. Look, when we were then speaking in private chat, and I said, "You're
mighty over there," and you
what?
Know, every time I said something, you say, "Okay, well, that doesn't fit with the rules of the." You basically like you pigeonhole somebody, and you like have total authority, and you're saying. And everything I said was that okay, you could feel that way, but that doesn't fit with the community. Everything I said.
No, but again. So right here, this is a clear misinterpreting of of
No,
what I
it's
what
not
have I?
your words. It's your words. It's not a
Oh,
show me where I misinterpreted your words. And actually, don't show me in the private chat. Show me somewhere that was actually in the Sula community where I misinterpreted someone's words. Show me that.
well, that entire chat that we had, the argument was part
That
of
was
a much.
that was after I was banned, and it was emotional, and you were blocking me. You told me not to message you, and that was emotional. You could expect someone after going through this constant being banned, coming back up, being banned. I the truth is that the real reason you banned me, if that woman wouldn't have left, the Palestinian woman, or you were upset at the moderator, this would not be an issue. And that's the truth. You could say whatever you want, that the reason there was a different reason. That reason would not have come into the forefront unless you were being upset. That you were ready to find something to pound. And if you want to be honest with yourself and be honest in the situation, that's the truth. I would not. I would not.
Hold on, Nate.
What?
It is true that had that not happened,
Exactly.
you wouldn't have. You wouldn't have been banned.
Not fair. It's not.
Nate. But wait, Nate. I just want to point out, because again, I don't think ultimately I made the wrong decision. And even in this discussion here, you're showing certain traits that again, like, you speak, I don't interrupt, I start speaking, and within like seconds you just jump in. Like,
I'm not used to being on a live on a
but this isn't live. This is two people having a conversation. You speak, I listen. I speak, you listen. But that's not how it's happening. So again, you've shown a lot of signs that you're not going to be a productive member of the community. And again,
so that's your opinion.
but you're still not letting me finish. You see, I'm trying to finish, and you're not letting me finish. It's true. It's true that had I not been upset that Ahmad left, you wouldn't have been banned again so quickly. Yeah, I acknowledge that. But I am fairly confident you would have been banned again within a few days, because there are so many other red flags. And even when we had the discussion in private chat, I explained to you what you were doing that I found problematic. And your interpretation of that was, yeah, you just don't like when people disagree with you, when I explained something completely different. The way that you've dealt with getting banned since then, opening different profiles and just coming in like, being super salty about it and being angry. Again, these are all signs, and I'm saying this person to person. These are signs of emotional immaturity that is not going to be a productive contribution to our community. So again, after I banned you, you could have been upset, taken a few days, reached back out to me. We could have had a conversation kind of like we're having now, and we would have made it. I would have worked it out. But there's so many red flags that I just don't see how we could have you back in the community and have you be productive. If and I don't expect you to do this now, but take time to reflect on what I'm saying. Come back to me in a week, and if I actually see that you could acknowledge, where you went wrong, as I've done here today, where I've gone wrong, then I'd be happy to have another conversation to bringing you back into the community. But there's going to need to be an acknowledgement of wrongdoing and a dedication to improving.
Can I speak now?
Yeah, all you.
Yeah. So I admit that I was wrong when I first came on to use certain terms, and I moderated those terms. But you're accusing me of misinterpreting people's things, but I didn't misinterpret anything. Besides, when I'm dealing with you, you're saying I'm misinterpreting you. So like I really just feel like this. I'm bitter about the whole situation, because I'm a decent guy. I'm a good person. I in every other area of my life, I'm dealt with fairly, and I deal with others fairly. And I feel like I was screwed over here, and you should be able to understand why, after I'm banned and I'm having a private conversation with you, and you're being like kind of like high and mighty, and saying, there are things, if you want to go through that conversation with me, I could just point out to you where you were triggering, like you were throwing things at me as well. So it's like a two-way street. You can't just like, attack, you can't just attack a person and say, oh, you say all these things. And I totally could acknowledge when I was wrong, when I'm wrong about something. I even said to you, I would have understood of being put on a breather if I was approached and just said, oh, you have to put you on a breather for a thing. This is what happens here, and in a few days you'll come back and try to be more. I'm reasonable. I mean, you're presenting me as an totally unreasonable, totally like whatever crazy off the wall person that is. Meanwhile, to tell you the truth, Adar, on your server, I had some very meaningful conversations with others in private on that server that were on the other side of the issue, and I had very meaningful that were totally not combative, totally constructive. And I posted some videos, and Tal responded to me that you would. I mean, I'm not like just going on there to make people upset. But that woman that left that as a moderator, she was quite nasty with me. The moment I came onto that server, and I have a right to just because you want the demographics to be a certain way, and you're upset that you lost one of your people. That's not my problem. Like, she attacked me. She accused me of not wanting Palestinians to exist. All these different things that I never even said, and it was very, very hurtful. And she's saying, you're not going to come on here, and everybody's not going to agree with you, and all these things. You can imagine. I'm already building up resentment towards that situation. But I wanted to still stay on the community because I want to be involved in positive and constructive conversations. But on the other hand, I'm being attacked. It's like you don't give a person enough chance. I just feel I feel I was dealt with unfairly, and I couldn't have reached out to you again because you took me off as a friend. So in the middle, when I was conversing with you and DMing you, you took me off. I wrote good night, Adar, and then I said, oh, this message didn't go through because the person doesn't have you as a friend. You think I'm gonna invite you as a friend to DM you again and reach out when you already took me off? I mean, come on, you're doing things that are contradictory to what you're saying. Like, it's like you have a right not to have me on your solo thing, but I have a right to be very upset about it, and I feel that I would have been a constructive member, and that I was coming with in good faith, and I felt like I was, and you agree with that shaded your judgment, and you're assuming that I probably would have been banned at a certain later date. He's like, you're sure you wouldn't have been banned then, but you probably, because there's so many red flags. I mean, it's just when I was speaking with many members on that site, and we were going back and forth in different channels, they didn't say to me there were red flags. They didn't say anything to me like, and I've even been talking to Beast Process lately, and the guy with the Arabic, I don't know what his name, because it's the Arabic, and we had a constructive private conversation. Like, it takes a little time for people to get to know each other, and to it's like you have to give some leeway. I think that the initial experience that I had when I came on, that made everything bad because I was dealt with unfairly, and then that woman, whatever her name is, I forget her name, Sultana, she left, and she was upset because I was defending myself against her attacks against me. I mean, come on, like, it's not right. I see plenty of, that's what that is. So that's basically where I'm coming from. I hear what you're saying, and you want me to. I admit that I used unfortunate language at the very beginning. I admit that, and I admit that. I see that you think that I'm misinterpreting what people are saying. I mean, I see the words that you type. If someone types words to you that can be interpreted, I feel I'm being misinterpreted as well. I mean, it's not. It's a very easy thing to say. Oh, you're misinterpreting people. It's very easy to say that, but I haven't had anyone else say that to me, that you're misinterpreting what I'm saying to me besides you.
I hear you. I will show you examples, but again, I do acknowledge that you were treated unfairly, and I apologize that that's what happened to you. Then that was your experience in the community. I do hope that you reflect on the feedback I gave you, and if you want, we can speak again in a week and reassess what the best way moving forward is. I think this was ultimately a good conversation, but their work and dedication to better discourse is going to need to be had in order for us to move forward together. But I appreciate you sharing your thoughts. I think ultimately this was a productive conversation. I am going to bring somebody else on just because we do have a bunch of people waiting.
How do I reach out to you? Because I can't. I'm blocked from DM.
I'll message you.
Okay.
I got you. No hard feelings, Nate. Be well.
Yeah.
David, what's up?
Hey, Shalom. Great to meet you. I was just random. I've watched your show like 10 times. I spoke with Mordecai, and I was just came up on my screen that you were live, and I saw you had the link in the chat, so I thought I'd say hi.
Oh, cool. What's on your mind?
Nothing much. I'm in Metro Detroit. I'm a streamer. I'm kind of like a failed Haredi Bolt Tshuva. Yeah, I think Zionism, I see, kind of disasters happening in the Jewish community, fissures, and lack of communication, lack of conversation, hard to create, Israeli politics, but on all levels. And, I know that, Rashida Tlaib's people here, and I was just talking on a different stream about Andy Levin and famous Carl Levin's nephew. And, he's being called an anti-Semite now for defending Ilhan Omar. And, I think things really got out of hand. And so I didn't prepare anything. I just saw your live, and I say, I'm glad you're doing your show. Whatever you're dealing with, streaming's tough work. I started out promoting Judaism, like Chabad, and just teaching people how to do Friday night prayers. And I ended up pretty prominent debating anti-Semites, largely from people trolling my channel. But now I'm more known for arguing with anti-Semites. And I'm actually the one who hooked up Mordecai to debate Adam Green.
Cool.
I debated Joseph Cohn. But I just wanted to say thanks. And
Sure.
I'm not sure what you got going on. But I was saying maybe you should talk to religious anti-Zionists, or if not now, type people, because I think the anti-Zionism is very strong among Jews. I lived in Borough Park and even went to I was in Bubba Yeshiva, same yeshiva as Mordecai, and pretty anti-Zionist there. And now I see in Metro Detroit, if not now, and the younger generation, I don't know if it's anti-Zionism becoming the norm, but it's growing, and I think we're almost at the point where we're waging war against each other and not having conversations. So randomly, if you want to talk, we can in a few minutes. But I just want to say, thanks for streaming, thanks for trying to do this, and obviously it's tough work.
Yeah, thank you. Your name's David?
David. I'm David Kelton in Metro Detroit. I usually just go by David because I'm more, it's dangerous to be a streamer, especially, debating counter-Semites. But so it's usually safer. I just go by. And I created my channel to promote Judaism, actually. So that's why I called my channel.
Well, I appreciate the words of encouragement. This little session is giving people an opportunity to come on and criticize me or the platform, but words of encouragement are cool too. I'd be happy to discuss a collaboration at some point. So if you reach out to me, my info's in the description. Let's talk and see what we can do together. I'd also be happy to debate Adam Green, but it seems like he doesn't want to debate a secular humanist Jew.
He would. I message him kind of frequently. In fact, I'm here in Metro Detroit, and Sherman Wein, the founder of humanistic Judaism, and I'm a Bolt Tshuva. I went to basically a secular humanistic school that was founded by Jews, but it was like 20% Jewish. But yeah, I think Adam Green would almost definitely have you on his show. So, and I'm the rare guy who defended. I didn't think Adam Green was anti-Semitic, and unfortunately, it's probably the level of Adam Green's voicing. Probably 10-20% of Americans are asking the questions of the same thing Adam Green has. And if Adam Green's anti-Semitic, then 20% of America is anti-Semitic, and we're in a bad situation.
I hear that. I reached that conclusion just because Mordecai tried to get me on his show and he rejected. So I figured that
because of me. I think because I'm the only one that defends him against anti-Semitism.
Okay.
So if you went through Mordecai, he probably figured that you're just going to call him an anti-Semite.
Okay. Well.
Okay, so I'll reach out to you. I appreciate having him on, and keep up the good work.
Thanks for reaching out, David. Reach out to me on one of my social media platforms. We'll continue chatting.
Okay, we'll do.
Cool. Mossad, what's up, man?
Oh, I wasn't ready. Yeah, I'm okay, thanks. Yeah, I think I wanted to complain in a more general way, because I think what
Sure.
Nate has come up against is basically a problem that I don't know if you can even solve, because we are all biased, and you're just very biased to the left. You know, you may not think you're very far left, but that is my impression, which is, you know, that's cool. I mean, I'm sure you thought about your opinions, and you can justify them, or at least try to. But that bias causes you to see someone who disagrees with you as what you call unproductive or hateful or even racist, because this is what the left has been doing. And I don't know if it would be any different if the right controlled, you know, if it was the right, it would probably be the same. But at the moment, it's the left that is doing that. There is a tendency to block people who are on the right. There's a high sensitivity. People on the right have to self-censor all the time, where people on the left, less so. I mean, they do too, but less so. And this is what Nate was kind of going on about his specific case, but I think it's just a general thing where certain opinions are considered hateful, but to me they're totally valid. And I think that the leftist opinion is I wouldn't say hateful, but destructive. So you know, if you keep thinking that right wingers are the bad ones, the ones that if there were no right wingers there wouldn't be war, you misunderstand the world. It doesn't work like that, you know.
Yeah, so I hear you. I'm going to be honest. I think you
Oh, sorry,
have
just
like,
one more thing about
Sure.
completely. Just sorry, I forgot because I wanted to say it first. But this guy that phoned from Canada that was saying people are saying death to Arabs. I mean, that's disgusting. It shouldn't be life. Please, life to Arabs, health, prosperity, and happiness to Arabs. No death.
cool.
Please.
I'm happy you're saying that.
Yeah, I
But
think
look,
that's the majority opinion in Israel. People don't want Arabs dead. I mean, you know,
that's true.
We
It
have,
is.
we have a big argument with them and a dispute, but I don't think we want them dead. You know, I don't definitely.
I think
Sorry.
those who will be vocal about wanting them dead are a minority, but perhaps too significant of a minority. It's not it's not as fringe as I'd like it to be. But just about your feedback, I do think you have a false image of me. Me being far left. So I don't like the left-right paradigm because it doesn't give you a great understanding of how people view things. But if you take my criticism of Israel, it's true that comes off as far left. My criticism is similar to the far left, except
Yeah.
I'm very adamant about Israel having a right to exist and calling for Israel's destruction being harmful, right? So that's where I'm probably quite different from the far left. When it comes
Yes,
to
true.
when it comes to like free markets and a social safety net, I definitely am left of center. I think we should have a social safety net, but I do value free markets. I think they're great at solving certain problems. And I'm very critical of authority, which is something that both the left and the right do, depending on where you are oriented on the spectrum.
Yeah, I'm critical of authority too. So.
But I do want to tell you something, because when it comes to the woke left, which are huge on censorship, shutting down conversation, assuming the worst of somebody's intentions, I am so in opposition to all that stuff. And I feel like that's almost your impression of me. If a right-winger disagrees with me, I welcome that discussion. That's why I had Mordechai on for a debate. I knew his views are very different from me. I have no problem with that. The people who are getting put on breathers in chat are ones who are saying actually hateful stuff, like whether it's a group generalization of people, whether it's a personal attack. These are the people who are put on breathers. It's not people criticizing ideas on the merits of ideas.
Yeah, but it's your bias that sees, you know, it's like your place on the scale is where you judge what is hateful from. You are less likely to see a leftist opinion as hateful. then
Well,
a right-wing opinion
again,
is hateful.
but
And that's not a fault of yours. It's we all like that.
no,
It's
but
not,
Mossad, it's
you're not
not.
superhuman.
Do you know? First of all, it's true. I have bias, of course. I'm a human. But if you look, we only have 12 people who are banned from the YouTube channel. That's it, 12. The majority of them are anti-Semites. The people here who came spreading like Nazi propaganda.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean anything because there's many more anti-Semites than Israelis, Israeli right-wingers. So those proportions don't mean a thing. It's just a general thing that happens. I've noticed it happen to. I mean, to give an example of your bias, you literally thinking that you need more women on the channel, to me, is left-wing bias. Because to me, it should be organic. If a woman wants to speak, great, let her speak. But if I wouldn't make any effort to bring more women or more white people or yellow people or short people or fat people. Whoever comes and wants to express their opinion, especially if it's interesting, then let them come on. I mean, but
so
that's a leftist thinking.
Yeah,
See,
no, for sure. That's an ideological disagreement between us. I don't know. If
no, but I'm not against women coming in. Please do.
No,
but
you just don't think. Right. So again, I don't know if this is bias per se. This is just an ideological disagreement. I could back up why.
It is a bias because it ends up allowing more rejecting men to favor women. So there'll be 10 million women who want to come on, and 100 men, and those 10 will get to. But out of those 100, only 10 men will get to. You're creating a bias situation
but
from the
Mossad,
start.
you're talking about a problem in. You're addressing a criticism of something like affirmative action, but that's not how it would play out on the show. We don't have a long list of men who aren't coming on the show.
No, I know, but that's just a general point. That kind of thinking.
But again, this is a case by case basis. I've heard the critiques.
I was trying to make more general points rather than attack you personally, because Nate was going on about his personal issue with you. I was trying to make this general point where it's not just you, but the left assumes that their position is the center. And they always hate to say, oh, well, I don't like left and right, because they want to think that they're in the center. We all do, to be honest. But they kind of, by rejecting opinions outside your kind of Overton window, whatever you want to call it, is hate. They're not always hate. I mean, I can go through stuff you say and say, oh, to me that's hateful, because the consequences of what you say will be death to my family. So to me that's hateful. But I mean, we can define all sorts of things as hateful.
Sure,
take it to anything,
That's true. That's true.
And this is a problem. And on top of it, YouTube is making it hard as well. So the whole debate is veering leftwards and leftwards and leftwards, to the point where people think that right-wingers hate Palestinians. I don't hate Palestinians. I wish them the best. I absolutely do not hate them. There's no reason for me to hate all these people. They've never done anything to me personally.
Mossad, I just want to, again, no, I just feel like a lot of the criticism is criticism you have of the left in general, but I actually do not think that is quite, I don't think that's quite the case. So it's true that, again, I have bias 100%, but, and your criticism is how loosely hate is interpreted, right? It's like, oh, that, racism, whatever, you know how like the woke left does, they'll call anything hate. Speech is hate and silence is violence, right? Yes. Speech is violence and silence is violence. So it's like, what are you left to do? Just conform to what they want you to do, right? Yeah. I hear you, but we have a criteria. We try to follow it. Our bias doesn't allow us to follow it 100%, but we do try to work by a criteria. So group generalization. So for example, Star Hopper often, if a Palestinian is speaking, Star Hopper will say, you tried to kill us. He will say you because they're Palestinian. So he's attributing the collective to an individual. That's not cool.
That's right. True, but that's true to an extent. But many times when you say you're just generalizing
I know, but I'm not cool with that. So he should find a way to express himself better. He should say there has been a lot of calls for Israel's destruction in Palestinian society. This is why we don't feel safe. This is why we feel the need to defend ourselves. Cool, say that. But when a guest is speaking, he says, it's your fault. You did this. You brought this upon yourself. Okay, no, we're not cool with that here. Again, there could be some bias involved, but we do have a criteria. So personal attacks, group generalizations, or just being unnecessarily inflammatory, which I guess is the most up for interpretation. We try to get these people out of here because internet is a toxic cesspool by and large. Go on Twitter, go on YouTube comment section. We want our contribution, Sulha's contribution to the world is to be positive. And so we don't want to foster a toxic environment, even in the chat.
You have to understand that what you see as positive, someone like me sees as negative.
Again, right? There's gonna be interpretation for sure.
And so therefore, what you see as negative is me. My opinions you see as negative. We'll probably agree on certain things, but if we go down
Masad, you've never been put on a breather. You have never been put on a breather. So
no, but I'm just because I know how to be careful. Okay. You know,
it's because you know how to engage in a way that
no, I self-censor a lot more than leftists have to. It's just a fact. I can see them getting away with stuff that I know if I wrote the same thing, I will be blocked. Not just here, just generally by YouTube or by moderators. They will jump on me and tell me that I'm hateful and start arguing with me, and I can't be bothered with that. I just block them. I just block them. I just said to everyone who starts annoying me, you have 2 sequends before I block you. Say something nice.
So, to be honest, I haven't actually seen you be hateful. We obviously don't agree on a lot.
I don't want to be hateful.
No. I've actually not seen you. I don't think your rhetoric is hateful. I think the past few days you've made some false accusations about the channel myself, but I don't view you. I don't think you've been hateful, and that's why you haven't been put on.
It was shorthand. You know, when you type, it's like you get angry and you type as quick as you can in the shortest sentence you can. So,
so just recognize that again. It's not the disagreements isn't what's getting people banned, right? So you haven't been hateful. That's why you've never been put on a breather. You haven't been banned. So there definitely is a way to navigate. And again, maybe you feel like you're walking on eggshells, but we're pretty. Again, you feel like you're walking on eggshells in this space, or in general, in what you consider to be left-wing spaces?
I mean, first, on this channel, yes, especially depending on which mods are active. I don't know, maybe the mod that left, that got upset with Nate is a mod that would have got angry with me. But YouTube is blocking me. I have to change words. And I'm not saying
I know,
anything.
I know.
You know, they block me from saying words because I got into some argument defending black people, and now I can't write the word black. Every time I write anything with the word black, it's crazy.
I'm happy you're bringing this up. So, chat, I want to make this very clear. We don't delete comments unless someone wrote a very nasty comment about one of our guests. I deleted that because I know that our guests read the comments and I didn't want them to be insulted. If it was a legit critique, I would have kept it there. But YouTube deletes so many comments, and some of them aren't even problematic. Like, YouTube algorithm picks up on certain words and deletes stuff. So what I would suggest people do is take your comment and put it in notes before posting it. And then if it gets deleted, try to change the wording to post it again. Because YouTube is like authoritarian as fuck when it comes to censorship. It's wild. And they don't even give you as a channel the right to decide, like, to be more lax. Yeah, it's messed up. Mossad, I do want to bring on.
I think, thanks for listening. But I think it's something for you to maybe think about in general, because I think, and I mentioned this I was writing that you're seeing the world in a very American way. You know, I've been living in Europe and a bit in America. You see the world in a very American way. America is an unusual country where different ethnicities created a country effectively. And the country was set up in a certain way, and you're all made to think that way. But most of the countries of the world are not like that. They're built around an ethnicity, and you think in a different mode to how this. And people have joked about it in different ways before with you, and this. I hear this. This is a repeating theme, and it's something. It's really hard to get out of that mindset, because I'm an Israeli in England. And I can't get off my Israeli mind, and I have to adjust myself to fit into the English state of how you behave. So it's really hard, but you have to keep thinking about that. You have to wonder. I think you grew up in America, and the American ideal, which is beautiful, there's nothing wrong with it, is sort of stuck in your mind. Sorry, I'm taking too much time, so I'll let the next guy go.
Yeah,
go.
I do want to let other people on, but I appreciate this conversation, and I think we'll do these chats more often. I think they're ultimately healthy. So thanks for
Great,
sticking
thank you.
around, Mossad.
Yeah, I'll
Talk
listen.
soon.
Thanks.
We're gonna let some more on. H-Refi, I see by your hand motions that you really want to get on, but we do have other people. One quick thing, okay? It's gonna be 15 seconds.
Okay, the point I want to make is to respond to the women on this. The kind of people who act in this way in the chat drive women off more, because the cost for women for engaging in online hate, the cost for them, the risks for them are higher. That's why they don't do it. The amount of hate they get from this kind of crowd, which frankly some of the guests were like that, is much more dangerous for them than it is for a man. I'm a man, I can defend myself. I don't have the social pressures. If somebody goes and doxes me, it's not going to be as dangerous. That is the main issue. One of the main issues of why they don't come on as much. And frankly, it's one of the reasons why I'm the face of an organization rather than the 2/3 of women who are part of it, because they don't want to have this kind of violence directed at them, basically.
Right. Thanks, H. I think that's one of the reasons why we have less women coming on, because the attacks against them are way harsher. I've noticed that when women voice controversial or strong opinions, they get a lot more hate than what I get, for example, for doing them. So I hear you.
I just wanted to say that, and I didn't even respond to anything else Mossad said and his identitarianism.
Thank you, H. Cool. Fremont, what's up?
Hello.
Hey.
Can you hear me?
This is cool. This is kind of like a call-in radio show, but on YouTube. We're doing it. Yeah. What's up, Fremont? Cool. What's on your mind?
I discovered your channel not long ago. It's nice. I like it. I'm French. I am neither Jew, nor Arab, nor Palestinian, nor Muslim, nor anything. I'm educating myself on this situation, let's say. And there was one point that surprised me, almost shocked me, that you talked about, that in France, if you would say there is even saying it sounds freaking weird, a Jewish gene, that sounds very anti-Semitic. I mean, you would be labeled far right, close to Nazi for just saying it. And hearing on your channel that it's a total normal thing to talk. And of course, when I think about it, it's like, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, there's a small group of people living in some area 2,000 years ago when there was not so much interbreeding. Okay, apart from the brutal custom of that time, when there was, the people were attacked other tribes and take women from that area and interbreed. So yeah, there will be interbreeding, but not that much, I guess. So of course, a group of people in an area, well, yeah, they have a common genes, like Dans have, like Caribs have, like and everything. But the sentence, that sounded so weird, and I wondered, well, does that mean anything to you? And is it not anti-Semitic?
Yeah. So this is a good question, and not so easy to answer. The Jewish gene is problematic because that's kind of how Hitler viewed Jews, right?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Hitler said Jews aren't just a religion; they're a people. Even if you're an atheist Jew, we still will round you up. But that doesn't mean that there isn't genes, and genes are complex. It's not just that there's a Jewish gene. It's that in doing DNA tests, you can see if somebody is ethnically Jewish. So Judaism is a religion, but it's also a meta-ethnicity. So a collection of a few different ethnicities that seem to have a common heritage. So that's what we mean by Jewish gene. Now, I don't think it's a particularly interesting conversation. Often the Jewish gene conversation is brought up because someone will say, Jews have no connection to the land, right? They'll say, you got zero connection to the land. And then a response would be, not only do we have historically and culturally, but if you look at an Ashkenazi Jew like myself, you'll see that Ashkenazi Jewish DNA is 50% Levantine, so 50% from the Middle East. So that is a response to people saying Jews don't have connection to the land. Another time Jewish DNA is brought up, which I also think it's not a good argument, is saying, Jews deserve the right to Israel because look at our genes. Again, I don't think that's a strong argument. And then I think where Jewish genes are most relevant is in just genetics and pharmacology. So there's, for example, Jews have certain Ashkenazi Jews primarily have certain like genetic diseases that they're way more common to have. So it's not uncommon when two Ashkenazi Jews get married and are going to have children that they get genetic tests to see that they both don't have the Tay-Sachs gene, which is quite common amongst Ashkenazis. So in that instance, it actually is important. There's a benefit to understanding that there are genes that Jews are more likely to have in their DNA. So I hope that kind of gives you
drepanocytose. I'm searching it on internet how to say that in English, but like drepanocytose. If you are black, you have more chances to get drepanocytose.
Yeah, it's similar to that, right? Okay. So there are genes that are more common in certain ethnic groups, for sure. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But it's not particularly important. Like somebody who's constantly talking about Jewish genes,
I was wondering if
that.
But thanks for your answer. I think I get it. Okay, it makes sense. It's not something like you base your worldview would be a big sentence, but your appreciation of your kind between bracket claim to Israel.
No, I don't find it particularly.
It's not something like that. Okay. That's reassuring, really, because, if I didn't hear that from Israeli Jews, somebody you technically can't say they are anti-Semitic, and I would not know who said that, I would be like, whoa, that's freaking Nazi. But okay, no, it's just, okay, you looked it up and you realize that, yeah, on a pharmaceutical point of view, it's practical.
It makes sense, yeah.
Okay.
No, that's true. That is a point that I actually didn't bring it up. Somebody who is like, you could be a Jewish supremacist and then also constantly be focusing on genes, being like the Jewish genes are somehow supreme. Right, that too would be a red flag. So there's a lot of instances in which Jewish genes would be brought up where you could see it as a red flag for something. Not inherently. It just depends on the context of the conversation. I'm going to bring on someone else, Fremont. You have any?
Okay, well, thank you. I was just wanted to say that it's a nice channel, and muchos besos, gros bisous. Si tu viens en Normandie, un de ces quatre, n'hésite pas, je te ferai découvrir le coin. Ah, yes, and one more thing, with a lot of love. There are two nations who are the most stupid on this planet. It's England and France. We had 100-year-old war. Please don't beat us and just get along, guys. Thank you very much.
True.
I don't want Joan of Arc to be forgotten.
Thank you.
Bye.
I just want to take this super chat. Matthew K, $10. Thank you so much. Anyone getting blocked is immature and too focused on proving their point rather than actually contributing to a constructive debate. Don't loop Adar in with wokeness. Cancel culture doesn't apply here. I agree, and I appreciate the words of encouragement. I appreciate that. All right, I do want to wrap it up. We're going on 2.5 hours. We will bring on 2 more people, and then we're going to sign off. Nir, what's up?
Hi, can you hear me good?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, so I live in Israel, and I consider myself a left Zionist. For me, what that means is that we do have a right for self-determination in Israel. That doesn't mean that the Palestinians don't have the same right, because we are both indigenous to this land. What I want to ask you are 2 questions. The first one is about anti-Semitism. Do you think there is a chance that it will fade out in the next, let's say, 20 to 30 years? And the second question is, do you think somehow we can change the way the world views Zionism, or how people say Zion Nazism or something like that, because I really think Zionism is a great idea. It's like I view myself as a Zionist in my heart. It pains me to see such bad things said about Zionism in Israel, because even though people think that left people don't like Israel, that's not true. I love my country. That doesn't mean that I have to hate Palestinians to love it. That's my view.
Yeah, good questions. I don't think anti-Semitism is going to disappear anytime soon. It's hard for me to predict anything. Nir, I'm going to mute you just because I'm getting an echo. Cool. But it really is hard to predict anything a few decades in the future, just because of how fast things are actually really changing. You know, we don't really know what the world is going to look like, and I think often forms of hate aren't created in a vacuum. They're connected to environmental conditions which cause people to lash out at different groups for one way or another. Generally, if you're a happy person, if you're doing well socioeconomically, if you have meaning in life, you're not going to be hateful. So if the world evolves to a place where people have meaning and people aren't struggling to survive, then I think naturally you're going to have a lot less forms of group hate. And I'm hopeful we could bring the world to that point. When it comes to viewing Zionism differently, I think I don't think we're going to win any PR war. I think like how Hezbollah is doing it, just trying to justify what Israel does and saying defense this and that. I don't think that's ever going to be a winning argument. I think people would be able to get on board with Zionism when the conflict is solved, because currently they view a lot of human rights abuses done in the name of Zionism. What I suggest, and I think this might be the single best way to get people okay with Zionism, is actually to not use the term. I'm not sure the term Zionism is needed, because if we're going to say Zionism is just the right to Jewish self-determination, why does that need a special word, right? I support Jewish self-determination. I support Palestinian self-determination. I support Kurdish self-determination. I support people's right to self-determine. We don't need a special term to describe that form of self-determination. It's true that the history of Zionism, it didn't just mean self-determination. It was a very specific political movement. And most people who are anti-Zionist are not against Jewish self-determination. They're against that political movement, which wanted an exclusive Jewish state on land that had other inhabitants. So when anti-Zionists are viewing Zionism differently from how we are identifying as Zionists, so my suggestion is to just make the claim, I think Jews have a right to self-determine. Jews have a right to a homeland. Jews have a right to be safe in that homeland. I think that's a much easier case to be made than try to defend the Z word, which they view as like inherently like hateful. It's just an unnecessary uphill battle. So that's my suggestion for how to have these conversations. I don't use the term Zionist when I'm engaging with people. I just say, why wouldn't you support Jewish self-determination? What's wrong with that? People deserve that right, and generally people agree with that.
Okay, so you don't use the word Zionist, but do you, in a sense, consider yourself a Zionist?
So if we're using Zionism as, I'm going to meet you again. If we mean Jewish self-determination, then yeah, I'm a Zionist. I support Jewish self-determination. If you mean Zionism, the political Zionism, which has a very troubling history and is still used today to justify certain policies, then no, I'm not that Zionist. I support Jewish self-determination. But again, when I go and tell somebody I'm a Zionist, if that person's a Zionist, then they'll be like, yeah, I get you. If that person's anti-Zionist, they're going to think there's something inherently racist or wrong with me, and we're starting the conversation from a place of deep bias. It just, the conversation is going to be less productive, and it's not only is it not a particularly useful word, but it gets in the way of having good conversation. So I just don't use it. I don't think it's needed.
So when I talk to someone and I say that I'm a Zionist, I usually explain what Zionism is. I mean, I tell them that there's left Zionism, right Zionism, religious Zionism, secular Zionism, and it makes the person I'm talking to more open to the idea of the Jewish right to self-determination. So I'm not against you. I don't think we should stop using what you call the Z word, because I don't see nothing wrong with Zion, with going back to Zion, to Jerusalem. But yeah, I understand it triggers people. That's the thing. It troubles me that it triggers people, but we'll manage.
Yeah, no, I hear you. We could just have different strategies to how to have discourse. From my experience, I've seen that normally when a Zionist and anti-Zionist speak, they're speaking past each other. The Zionist is going to say why Jews deserve self-determination, and the anti-Zionist is going to explain why they can't support self-determination that looks the way Zionism has looked the past 70 or even 100 plus years. So it seems like it brings the conversation into like a very philosophical point, to a very philosophical place, and it's just a less productive conversation. But if you're successfully having these conversations, then I won't tell you not to have them. It's just what I've experienced in engaging in this type of discourse.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, for sure,
really
Nir.
like your.
Thank you, Nir. And if you haven't joined our Discord yet, you should
I
join
did.
it. Oh,
I
great.
did.
Awesome. So we'll continue chatting there. Thank you, Nir.
Bye.
And last but certainly not least, P-Ball, our fan favorite. P-Ball, are you here? You're on mute.
Yeah. Hello.
What's up, man?
Yeah, so like about Nate, on his first on his first day on the server, like he was like kind of like, I don't know, he was aggressive, like me and Yazin were like talking with him, like we were like joking with him, we were just saying something like Israel doesn't have the right to exist, and like he was taking it so much seriously, it's like, and he actually he called us like he called us like terrorists and children just because we were joking with him,
Yeah,
I mean,
but people, you should be able to understand why that's very inflammatory to someone, especially if they don't know you, right? They just joined the server, and if you say you said it was as a joke, Israel doesn't have a right to exist. How does he know you're joking? Like, obviously, that's gonna offend somebody.
yeah, true.
Yeah.
I know that, but like it's kind of like we made it to him obvious that we were joking, but still he didn't understand. Like, yeah, I'm not.
Yeah, well, we save the jokes for the playground channel just so we don't have these misinterpretations, right?
Yeah, like we were messaging him on Playground, I think. Yeah, on Playground.
No, I don't think it was there. It was in one of the discussion channels. But look, I hear you. I mean, you should be able to understand why he would be offended by that. Similar to, let's say you just join a Discord, you don't know anybody there, and then an Israeli says, there's no such thing as Palestine. You wouldn't like that.
Yeah, true, but yeah, I understand why he was kind of angry and he was aggressive, but like he was we made it to him obvious that we actually were joking, but he still didn't really.
Yeah,
consider it
I
as
don't think he knew that. People, you want to address something Starhopper just said? He goes, Adar, P-Ball said that he would be proud to have his kids be martyrs. That means he would be proud if they killed you, but you're thrilled to see him. That's the disconnect with the left right here.
So like that was a comment on one of Corey Gilshuser videos. Like he was like saying something like he was making a comment of he was making like that Palestinians hate hate Israel more than they like love their children or something. Like they're ready to sacrifice their children to just for like it's like it's something like if you it's what I was meaning, like I told him I would be happy if my child was a martyr. And yeah,
Yeah, so yeah,
that
you
was
were
very I
you
understand.
were engaging in just like you guys were just having a go at each other, I guess. You were trying to you found him inflammatory, you wanted to be inflammatory back.
Yeah, like I hate Starhopper because like he's extremely racist. He's like
Right.
like he even says that we don't even exist. Like the whole Palestinian people don't exist. Like
Yeah, no,
maybe
I could understand why he would you would be inflamed by certain things Starhopper said, without a doubt. But just try to not stoop to people's levels. If somebody is acting shitty, um, you know, you don't need to say you want your children to be martyrs unless you actually believe that. But
no,
I think
I don't really believe that. But like
our
I just
children
wanted
deserve
to enter
better.
him. He's like like at that time I was like I was debating a lot of like right-wing Zionists, and like I really like they're like from the far left or whatever, from the far right. Like and I experienced something like they were very hateful against me, so I became more hateful. That's before
Right.
I joined the server.
So yeah, Starhopper, I hope that you hear this and that you see that your rhetoric actually inflames Palestinians. Like your contribution to the activism has not been helpful. It's actually made Palestinians more extreme. Maybe your contribution to day-to-day life, maybe your job, maybe you're a family man. I can't comment on that, but your contribution to activism, Starhopper, has really been one that has, on one hand, gotten Palestinians to be inflamed, further aiding in their radicalization, and it's also just made people think less highly of Jewish people because they see how you act. So keep that in mind. I don't think you want to have a negative contribution to this
Yeah,
world,
and
at least
also
in terms of activism.
I didn't mean like an attack on like being martyr. Martyring is like being like being killed in honor of like fighting for your freedom or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
No, I hear that.
yeah,
I
but like
hear
it,
you.
it doesn't have anything to just like attack people and like saying he will be happy to kill you. He said something like that in his comment.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna wrap it up. I do want to take one comment that I see made by Jake. So Jake, this is actually a very common misconception, and it's just all around harmful. Jake goes, Palestinians come from Arabia. They colonized the area through war. So it's true that Arabs colonized the area. The people they conquered were the indigenous people of this land. Those people are today Palestinians. So it's true that they did intermarry, so Palestinians are part Arab, and their culture certainly has been Arabized, but they are the indigenous population like us. Many Palestinians used to be Jews or Samaritans or another indigenous group to this land who was colonized and then converted to Islam. But it's not that the Arabs came, killed it, and kicked everybody out, and then those are the Arabs. That's not the case. Palestinians today, if you trace their bloodline back, it goes back thousands. Not all, right? You did have immigration, but many Palestinian bloodline goes thousands of years back on this land, the same way Jews have it. We often say that Jews and Muslims are cousins, biblically speaking, right? You have Ishmael and Isaac, right? But but we're actually brothers. We're long lost siblings, brothers and sisters, because it's not just that we're cousins through Isaac and Ishmael. We actually come from the same people who, for the past few thousand years, have just lived very different lives, and now we're reconnected, fighting with one another. But we should see that as our commonality that connects us. And saying that Palestinians come from Arabia is the same thing like saying that Jews are just European colonizers and have no connection to the land. We need to stop erasing people's connection to the land. It's just not helpful.
Yeah, like both people are indigenous to the land. You know, it's like
yeah, we're both indigenous. That's something we have in common.
They're indigenous. Like denying that is not gonna work. Like you're gonna be, you know.
Yeah. Amen. Cool. We're gonna wrap it up. Any final words, P-Ball?
No, actually, I was just saying something about Nate's saying and about Starhopper's comment. So yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm happy. I'm happy you got to express yourself. As always, it's great chatting with you. We could. I see the chat's still active. We could have an after party. I'm not gonna join, but we whoever wants, I'm gonna drop a Discord link. You can join the Discord on the left-hand side. It says Lounge. You click Lounge, and you'll be connected via voice. You don't need to speak or show yourself, but we'll do an after party there. I just dropped it there. Yeah. See you all. I don't know. We're gonna have. I guess next Sunday I'm going to be on Israel Advocacy Movement's page debating Joseph Cohen on the Nakba, and we're going to do a live stream sometime next week, probably a video review where we review and debunk a video. And we don't have a Thursday debate or panel set up yet, but we're working on setting them up. So I hope to see you all there. And yeah, much love. Signing out.